The story begins with a man holding a gun, declaring that everything he is about to do is for the Empire, to eliminate those who threaten the Emperor and its people. He believed there was no other purpose for the existence of the Imperial Guard. Effortlessly, he deflected all the bullets fired at him and eliminated every enemy in his path in an instant. From the shadows, someone clapped in admiration. The man who had vanquished his enemies then bowed respectfully to the door behind him. In the future, Earth became a world where technology had advanced significantly. However, this progress did not bring hope to humanity. Endless wars, driven by the lack of resources, continued to ravage the planet, pushing humanity to expand to other planets. Ultimately, life on Earth came to an end when an unknown alien species invaded. The surviving remnants of humanity wandered through space, enduring a long and arduous journey until they discovered a planet remarkably similar to Earth. They named this new world Novvice, meaning new home. The coordinates of Novvice were broadcast across space, summoning humans scattered throughout the galaxy to gather at this newfound sanctuary. Three main factions emerged as humanity rebuilt on Novvice. The Balado Federation, a society where countless alien species coexist alongside Earthlings. The Accretion Empire, a militaristic power boasting an army of soldiers with mechanized bodies. The Holy Korite Alliance, a theocratic faction led by priests who wield force energy and unparalleled mental fortitude. However, resources on Novvice were limited. History began to repeat itself, and humanity prepared once again for war, this time, to monopolize the planet's finite resources. At the Accretion Empire's Machination Lab, a trainee was informed that he was next and was told he had bad luck, as he would inevitably be subjected to many comparisons. The Accretion Imperial Guard commander, Hemias Custoria, addressed the young trainee, reminding him that this was his moment to prove himself to the Majesty and demonstrate what he was capable of. Commander Hemias emphasized that this was an important day for trainees like him and urged him not to forget its significance. The trainee, named Luka, confidently replied, "We'll see who the unlucky one really is." Commander Hemias smirked and warned Luka to live up to his expectations. Luka firmly responded, "I will." As Luka donned his mask, he reminded himself that he needed to be at least capable of dodging and blocking bullets, a vital skill to qualify as an official member of the Imperial Guards. He had completed all the simulation training under the most extreme conditions. As a trainee of the Imperial Guards, he possessed heightened spatial awareness, thanks to the senses and perception reinforcement procedure. His opponents were 5 death row inmates outfitted with cheap cybernetic enhancements. Considering their equipment and skills, Luka quickly concluded it would take him no more than 10 seconds to eliminate them. However, this was his chance to make a strong impression on the Emperor. Determined, Luka decided he needed to do something extraordinary, something truly noteworthy. Luka wondered if he could pull off the move lingering in his mind, something he had never attempted before. But here and now, he had no choice. He had to make it happen. Surrounded by enemies, Luka sharpened his focus and heightened his senses to their absolute limit, listening intently to the breaths of his opponents and the subtle sounds of his surroundings. When the enemies began firing at him, Luka deflected every bullet with his sword, redirecting them with precision to eliminate his foes. The sight of this remarkable feat brought a smile to Commander Hemilas's face. Standing amidst the smoke, Luka held his ground, his body marked by exertion but his pride intact. Gasping for breath, he felt a surge of satisfaction. He had done it. He had pushed past his limits. Luka couldn't help but think that this performance would surely elevate his value in the eyes of the Empire. When Luka returned, Commander Hemias remarked that he hadn't expected Luka to use ballistic trajectory control, adding that it wasn't supposed to be part of the curriculum yet. Luka casually replied that he had simply copied a guy who went before him. Commander Hemias chuckled and explained that the person Luka had mimicked came from a renowned household and had been taught the curriculum in advance. "He's different from someone like you," Hemias said, "an orphanage kid." Despite his words, Hemilas's tone carried no malice. Instead, he told Luka, "I like you, so I'll give you a gift." When Luka asked what the gift was, Hemias leaned in, opened one of Luka's eyes, and swiftly installed something into it. Luka didn't flinch or show any reaction to the procedure, prompting Hemias to nod in approval. "You must have done exceptionally well in your pain tolerance training," he remarked, his liking for Luka growing. "I'm glad to hear that," Luka replied calmly. He then added, "It's an eye I would have replaced eventually anyway." In Luka's room, a guy named Eli approached him and said he wanted to talk. Luka, caught off guard, was at a loss for words. Sensing this, Eli quickly apologized, admitting that he might have been too abrupt. Luca, however, gestured for him to come in. Once inside, Eli told Luca he was impressed by his performance earlier, adding, "You were really good back there." Luca, unfazed, replied, "You're in the wrong place if you're looking to exchange compliments," addressing Eli as young master. Eli Karthika. Just from his aura alone, Luca could tell he was the son of the renowned noble household, Karthika. Logically, there was no reason for Luca to act so aggressively towards someone of noble lineage. Perhaps it could be chalked up to envy, but for now, Luca decided to blame it on sheer exhaustion. Eli pulled out a blue capsule and offered it to Luca. He explained that he had brought it to help Luca, saying, "It'll reduce your sensitivity so you can rest better." Luca, however, shook his head. "I don't need it," he replied curtly. Eli countered, "If you don't get proper rest, you won't be able to train well tomorrow. You should know by now. Mental fortitude alone won't carry you through everything." After a brief pause, Luca reluctantly took the capsule and swallowed it. Once he had done so, he glanced at Eli and said, "You're pretty good too. I just copied you." Eli revealed that he had a mechanical eye designed for combat, making it easy for him to calculate trajectories. However, he remarked that Luca's actions were far more impressive, as Luca managed to succeed relying solely on his instincts. Eli also observed that it appeared the commander had taken an interest in Luca, an irregular. He speculated that this might be why the commander was gifting Luca a mechanical eye at his own expense. Luca then explained that he had put in immense effort during training, emphasizing the stark divide between the powerful nobility and the powerless lower classes. As a lower-class citizen, he added, he couldn't afford to let such a rare opportunity slip away. Reflecting on Luca's statement that nobility is excellence, Eli pointed out that while Luca may have passed the selection process, there were undoubtedly others who had failed. Eli speculated that some might have paid to manipulate the results. Though he had no concrete proof, it was something Eli strongly believed. He added that individuals like Luca, who lacked any form of support system, had never failed the advanced soldier cultivation process because their success was solely a testament to their skill. Luca was taken aback when a noble like Eli admitted that not all nobles were excellent, an idea Luca had never considered. This revelation left Luca wondering what Eli was trying to convey. Without warning, Eli extended his hand to Luca and said with conviction that he believed people like Luca were the ones who deserved to succeed. He added that he would be rooting for him. Luca, after a brief pause, shook Eli's hand and replied confidently that he intended to succeed. With a determined look, Luca added that his efforts were all for the Empire. This story unfolds the chronicles of a boy molded and raised as a military weapon in the oppressive Accretion Empire. Planet Novvice, a world resembling Earth, is home to three dominant forces locked in an endless struggle for power. They are the Free Belatian Federation, Accretion Empire, and Holy Korite Alliance. Luca headed to the practice area to test his newly transplanted eye. After firing several rounds, he inspected the target and saw that every bullet had struck the head. Eli, watching from nearby, was impressed and commented on how Luca managed to hit all the targets square in the head. He guessed that the top student truly was in a league of his own. Eli then asked if Luca was already getting used to the right eye he had received, and with a playful tone, questioned if it wasn't unfair for Luca to be this skilled with a gun when his specialty was supposed to be close combat. Luca replied calmly that it was only natural for members of the guards to excel with all types of weapons. He added that Eli shouldn't talk when he himself had just fired every shot through the same hole. Eli laughed, admitting that guns just happened to be his specialty. Luca warned him that if Eli kept being so nonchalant, Luca would eventually surpass him. Eli welcomed the challenge with a grin, saying that he would be more than happy to see it happen. After all, as he had said before, he was rooting for Luca. He added sincerely that the Empire needed people like him. The Empire's system was flawed, with the value of ability and talent increasingly diluted. In the Accretion Empire, status and power often overshadowed genuine skill, allowing even the powerless to be labeled as talented, simply by virtue of their influence. However, Eli believed that if more naturally gifted irregulars like Luca began to emerge, people would eventually learn to discern true talent from manufactured reputations. Luca, slightly taken aback, told Eli that his words sounded dangerously close to criticism of the Empire's system. He warned that if he were to report Eli's exact statement to headquarters, Not even Eli's position as a Karthika would protect him from the consequences. Eli, unfazed, smiled and replied that if he truly thought Luka would do that, he wouldn't have shared his thoughts so openly. He added that he already knew Luka was a good person and trusted him. With a warm smile, he thanked Luka for worrying about him. 2 years into training, during the third quarter, the commander made an important announcement. He declared that Luka and Eli would serve as platoon leaders for the upcoming exercise. With a sharp gaze, he added that if any trainee had an issue with this decision, they were free to stand up and leave. Silence filled the room as no one objected, prompting the commander to proceed. The mission briefing was intense. Across the gorge lay a Korite outpost illegally stationed within their territory. This exercise would serve as a test of their ability to operate effectively in the field. With a commanding tone, the commander emphasized that there was no need for prisoners. His final instruction was clear and absolute: eliminate them all. Eli mentioned that this was their first real mission. Luka asked if Eli was nervous, reminding him that he had already killed people during training. However, this was their first time confronting an external force. The Belatian Federation, the Holy Korite Alliance, and even the Accretion Empire all shared Earth's humanity as their ancestors. Luka advised Eli not to let his emotions take over and questioned whether he believed anyone there truly thought the senior guards were present to protect them. The full-body mechanical armor legion. Luka was certain the guards were there to supervise them and wouldn't hesitate to kill if anyone attempted to take prisoners. He acknowledged that fools unaware of their place had no business being part of the Imperial Guard. On planet Novvice, other forces were nothing more than insects to the Empire, a lesson they had learned well. Everyone there manipulated and deceived the Empire for personal gain. Eli, glancing at a girl and a child nearby, responded calmly, acknowledging, "I know. That's what we were taught." Moments later, the operation began, and they swiftly eliminated their targets. As they moved forward, they noticed that none of the Korans appeared to be armed. It seemed this training exercise would end without complications. However, as Luka patrolled the area, he stumbled upon a child crying and hiding behind a stone. The child was so terrified that he couldn't move, a non-combatant offering no resistance. Luka hesitated, his thoughts racing. If only he had a gun, he reasoned. As he stared into the tear-streaked face of the child, the words of their commander echoed in his mind. There's no need for prisoners. Eliminate them all. They're nothing more than insects, draining the Empire's resources. Luka thrust his sword into the rock, narrowly missing the child. Leaning in close, he whispered, "Pretend you're dead. It might be your only chance to live." He knew he shouldn't be doing this. If headquarters ever learned of his actions, the consequences would be severe, possibly fatal. As Luka slowly turned his back and began walking away, doubt crept into his mind. Should he go back and take care of the child to ensure no loose ends? But before he could decide, a shot rang out from above the tower, eliminating the child. Luka's eyes darted upward. It was Eli, standing with his weapon in hand, scanning the surroundings as if nothing unusual had happened. Shock coursed through Luka as he wondered when Eli had arrived. Had he been watching the entire time? Luka forced himself to stay calm, telling himself that Eli wouldn't report his hesitation. But what if one of the other trainees had seen? That could ruin him. Steeling his nerves, Luka resolved to keep a close eye on Eli from now on. Moments later, a blast of blue energy struck Eli, causing a violent explosion. Luka quickly turned to locate the source of the attack and saw a force user standing nearby, shouting furiously about sending the accretions to hell. Luka's eyes narrowed as he wondered if this force user had caused the explosion. If someone could create such destruction without weapons. Before Luka could finish his thought, Eli leapt behind the force user. Without even turning to look, the force user unleashed another explosion, sending shockwaves through the air. Luka froze, stunned by the sheer power on display. It was undeniable. This was the work of a force user. The force user, now calm but seething with anger, declared, "This isn't a base. It's a settlement. The people you killed were just trying to survive." Luka's mind raced. Did their captain know about this? Had the captain withheld this information from them deliberately? If they had known these were innocent settlers, perhaps Eli wouldn't have. Lying on the ground, Eli told Luka that he had let his guard down and had no excuses, but Luka assured him that he would handle the force user and urged Eli to rest. Luka believed his hesitation had caused the problem. He had learned countless times how to deal with a Force user, and he resolved to do whatever it took to make up for his mistake. Luka then declared to everyone that he would take care of the Force user and ordered the others to disperse and take over the base. The Force user conjured a magical force in his hand, preparing to attack Luka, while Luka observed that the Force user seemed to be acting as bait to buy time for his allies to escape. Luka understood that using force required a preparatory action, which, in this case, was the Force user's hand signs. As long as Luka could detect disruptions in space, he could react to the explosions. Luka successfully dodged the Force user's attack, while the Force user's nose began to bleed. Luka preferred a battle of attrition, but he had no other choice. Even though his body would collapse first if he continued maintaining high-speed maneuvers, he needed to attack while he was in this state. Pushing himself to move even faster, Luka closed in on the Force user and successfully landed a strike. However, the Force user retaliated by striking Luka's face with a force attack, shattering his mask. Upon seeing Luka's face, the Force user hesitated, wondering aloud how it was possible, exclaiming that Luka was just a child. Luka then landed on the ground, riding the body of the Force user with his sword embedded in it. Luka realized that if the Force user had followed through with his attack, he would have been killed. Korite consisted of fanatics beyond human comprehension, leaving Luka to wonder why the Force user had failed to kill him. Moments later, Luka heard a commanding voice, urging them to act swiftly and not let emotions cloud their judgment in battle. It reminded them that everything was for the Empire, to eliminate those who threatened the safety of the Emperor and the people. Protecting the Empire was the sole purpose of the Imperial Guard's existence. Nothing else mattered. In the recovery room of a Cretan hospital, both Luka and Eli rested as they recovered from their injuries. Eli mentioned that he had received new arms and legs this time and asked Luka how many modifications he had undergone. Luka replied that his back had been destroyed, so he now had titanium bones and artificial skin. Eli then speculated that their boss probably knew there was a Force user involved and suggested the lack of prior warning might have been a test. Luka noted that, judging by how their seniors didn't step in to help, they likely believed the trainees could handle it. After all, no one was killed in action. However, Eli found the situation odd. He pointed out that both he and another cadet, who had taken the Force attack head-on, survived. It seemed too unusual to dismiss as mere coincidence. Eli concluded that the Force user might never have intended to kill them in the first place. Recalling the Force user's words, Luka thought bitterly that he was already a warrior, a soldier. Letting him live had been the Force user's mistake. That pathetic display of mercy, Luka believed, was why the Quinuan would continue to perish. He wanted the Force user to live with regret, watching helplessly as his comrades were consumed by hell. Suddenly, Eli broke Luka's thoughts, asking why he had closed the eyes of the Quinuan girl. Luka turned his back to him and dismissed the question, saying Eli talked too much. He then sarcastically asked if Eli had gotten a new tongue as well. Luka added firmly that it had been a mistake and assured him it would never happen again. The trainees gathered as their superior addressed them, announcing that they had now completed 2 out of 4 years of Imperial Guard training. With younger batches following in their footsteps, they were reminded to set an example for the new recruits, especially Luka and Eli, who ranked as the top 1 and top 2 among their peers. Their superior encouraged them to aspire to the rank of centurion and to continue striving for excellence, all for the glory of the Emperor and his citizens. Both Luka and Eli responded in unison with a firm, "Yes, sir." The Imperial Guard structure was straightforward. 1,000 guardsmen divided into 10 centuries, all under the command of a chief centurion. The chief centurion also served as the centurion of the first century. Cadets like Luka, upon completing full-body mechanization, were assigned to the lowest-ranking unit, the 10th century. Luka thought to himself that if he could rise to become the centurion of the 10th century, it would be his stepping stone to something greater. To test their newly enhanced bodies, Luka and Eli engaged in a sparring session. Luka noted that Eli had grown stronger with his new arm. However, it wasn't enough. Luka still dominated, winning all 124 rounds against Eli with ease. Outside, Eli and Luka sat beneath the stars, their gazes fixed on the night sky. Eli broke the silence, admitting that he thought he might finally win this time. Luka responded bluntly, saying that if getting new parts was all it took to become stronger, training would be pointless. Eli smirked, commenting that Luka seemed even more rigid after their superior's speech. The whole Centurion thing must have had a big impact on him. Luka nodded in confirmation. He explained that if he gained experience as an Imperial Guard, he would be welcomed anywhere. Eli pointed out that Luka was already in a position where his birth no longer mattered. He questioned why Luka didn't relax a little. Luka, with a hard expression, replied that, unlike Eli, he had no place to return to. That was why he had to keep climbing, because if he didn't, it would all be over for him. Luka told Eli that he had talent but lacked drive. Then, he asked why Eli wanted to become a guardsman. Eli smiled faintly and asked in return if Luka thought the same thing. After a brief pause, Eli shared that his true dream was to become a scholar, an archaeologist who studied the ancient arcane civilization. Curious, Luka asked why he didn't pursue that if it was what he truly wanted. Eli sighed and explained that studying the arcane civilization was banned in the Empire. Besides, his family had a long tradition of producing generals, and they would never allow him to do anything else. Luka pressed further, clarifying if Eli was saying he was sad because he couldn't do what he wanted, and that he was spoiled. Luka added sharply that there were countless people in the slums who weren't even guaranteed to live another day, many of whom were simply grateful to have something to eat. Eli smirked knowingly, having expected Luka to say exactly that. Eli shared his secret with Luka, trusting his friend. Luka, however, warned him that someone might interpret his words as criticism of the Empire, which could ruin him if reported. Eli confidently replied that Luka would never do such a thing, just as he had kept Luka's secret. Luka, his expression firm, explained that he hesitated during the incident because his opponent was a non-combatant. He clarified that, even without Eli's interference, he would have gone back to finish the kill. With a serious face, Luka declared his unwavering loyalty to the Empire and the Emperor, who had recognized his talents. To him, the enemies of the Empire were also his enemies, and that included Eli, if it came to that. Eli simply smiled, standing and stepping down from where they sat. He turned to Luka and said he was a liar. If Luka's allegiance to the Empire truly surpassed all else, he would have already tried to kill him. Then, with a teasing tone, Eli advised Luka not to push himself too hard. Hearing those words, Luka could only respond with a single word: idiot. Third-year training mission. Reconnaissance. In an uninhabited neutral zone, Eli placed his hand on the wall, remarking that it was an arcane site and noting an energy response despite its age of millions of years. His eyes shone brightly as he asked if it wasn't fascinating. Eli explained that there were civilizations that had explored the stars long before humans existed. Luka thought he had drawn a line, but Eli never hesitated to cross it. Luka then stated that if they encountered another force while out there, it would lead to a fight. With a cheerful expression, Eli replied that even if they couldn't win, someone from the guards would surely come to their aid. Suddenly, someone in their group remarked that the present exists because of the past, and records allow them to predict the future. This was Claude Ramones, an Accretion Imperial Guard trainee. Claude added that thinking about it that way explains why so many people are fascinated by history. He then turned to Luka and asked if he could ask him something. Without waiting for a reply, Claude suddenly confessed that he liked Luka and asked if he was seeing anyone. Hearing this, Luka became serious. Taking a fighting stance, he warned Claude that if he came any closer, he would be considered a threat. Unfazed, Claude explained that if Luka wasn't seeing anyone, he wanted to introduce him to his younger sister. Luka then revealed that he was from an orphanage, but Claude assured him that whether he came from an orphanage or nobility, Luka was destined to become his superior. With a confident smile, Claude told Luka to think about it and proudly added that his sister was quite cute. At this, Eli couldn't resist teasing Luka for being so popular. Moments later, they detected something and immediately went into battle mode. A biological response. Eli's group took cover, prepared to provide support from the rear, while Claude and Luka stayed at the front. They noticed movement up ahead. As Luka observed more closely, he realized that the figure before them was a Korite paladin. The paladin, having noticed their presence, suddenly prepared to launch an attack. Realizing the danger, Luka shouted and commanded his comrades to retreat. But it was too late. Claude failed to dodge and was struck down, eliminated by the Korite paladin's attack. Luka stared at Claude's lifeless body, his mind replaying Claude's words about introducing him to his younger sister. For a brief second, he thought he saw the spear glow, but Claude's upper body was gone. Desperately, Luka activated his mechanical eye, hoping to calculate the spear's trajectory. Yet, No matter how many times he tried, all he received were multiple error messages. Suddenly, multiple gunshots were fired at the Korite paladin by Luca's allies as they urged Luca to pull himself together. They advised him not to just stand there but to fight and stall for time. Luca then thought of Eli. He realized Eli was right, that even if he tried to run, he wouldn't be able to escape this situation. Luca concluded that there was only one way to handle it, to fight until the Imperial Guard arrived. Luca is certain that if they hold on for just a dozen or so seconds, the Imperial Guard member watching will arrive. The Korite paladin aims at Luca and launches another attack with his glowing spear. That's when Luca realizes it's not just a matter of a dozen seconds. Even that is too much. The glowing spear moves so fast that it strikes Luca's mask, shattering it in just 2 seconds. Because of this, Luca wonders if he is going to die. He thinks there is no way he can survive a fight against that monster for a dozen seconds. Then, he remembers what his captain said, that he looks like a pig realizing it's about to be slaughtered. That if he turns his back on the enemy, all he will receive is a bullet to the head. He was told that if the enemy swings their blade, he must do the same. Luca managed to block the spear with his sword, but the impact sent his weapon flying. As a result, he could no longer use his hand. Seeing the Korite paladin in front of him, Luca knew he had to prepare for the next attack. The Korite paladin unleashed multiple energy slashes, and Luca instinctively tried to evade them. However, the attack wasn't meant for him, it was aimed at destroying his comrades. The Korite paladin then dashed toward Luca, prompting him to activate his mechanical eye, bracing himself for the enemy's attack. 12 seconds had passed when an Imperial Guard member suddenly dashed at incredible speed toward Luca and the Korite paladin's location. Just as Luca and the Korite paladin's attacks were about to collide, the Imperial Guard member caught the Korite paladin by the head and slammed it into the ground. Still gripping the Korite paladin's head, the Imperial Guard member flew toward the wall and smashed it against the surface. As smoke filled the air, the figure slowly emerged, revealing their face. Upon seeing it, Luca shouted in relief, realizing he had been saved. Moments later, the Korite paladin was still able to move. The Imperial Guard member then turned to him, emanating an intense red aura, while the Korite paladin's body glowed with a fierce blue aura. An Imperial Guard, clad in the Empire's weapon, Legion. A holy knight of Korite, wielding the power of the Force. As Luca watched the two warriors face each other, he wondered which side was stronger. Their movements were so fast that he couldn't even track their weapons with his eyes. Sweat trickled down his face as he realized this was the battle of an Imperial Guard. As the fight unfolded before him, Luca could only pray that the Imperial Guard would emerge victorious. As the fight continued, the Imperial Guard managed to catch and hold the Korite paladin's head. It seemed as though the Imperial Guard had the upper hand, but then the Korite paladin suddenly moved a finger, causing the spear behind Luca to stir. Luca noticed it, and in that moment, a chilling thought crossed his mind. The Imperial Guard, unaware of the speed and power of the spear, something Luca had already experienced, would likely be unable to react in time. If the Imperial Guard died, so would he. Luca knew he had to act. As the spear was pulled from the ground, Luca quickly used his foot to block its trajectory, hoping to make it miss its target. When the Imperial Guard noticed the glowing spear approaching, the Korite paladin grabbed his horn and left hand, restricting his movements. In response, the Imperial Guard used his right hand to slam the Korite paladin's head into the ground. A powerful explosion followed, sending debris flying. Small pieces of rock rained down on Luca as he lay on the ground, struggling to catch his breath. Dazed, Luca tried to comprehend what had just happened. He wondered who had survived. As he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps approaching. Suddenly, a voice commended him, telling him that thanks to his actions, they had managed to take down the knight. The person then extended a hand to help Luca up, offering to return to the base together. But Luca's expression suddenly turned to shock. Legion was a full-body mechanical armor bestowed by the Empire upon its Imperial Guards. By removing all feeble parts of the body unnecessary for combat, it transformed its wearer into the ultimate weapon. Every trainee dreamed of receiving a Legion, as it was the ultimate testament to becoming an Imperial Guard. However, Luca couldn't believe that the Imperial Guard was alive yet had no brain. He asked whether the Imperial Guard was a machine or a human. Confused by Luca's words, the Imperial Guard touched his head, only to find nothing. Shocked, He let out a cry before suddenly collapsing to his knees, lifeless. Luka felt sick realizing that he had been striving all this time to become a monster like this. The cold bit into him, and his body wouldn't stop shaking. He wondered if he could survive until help arrived. Moments later, Eli appeared, asking if Luka was still alive. Eli shared that, aside from the two of them, everyone else had died. Luka then asked what Eli planned to do next. He told Eli to look ahead, that the life he had always wanted was right in front of him. It lay in the direction of Korite and Bellado. What Eli wished for could not be found in the Empire. Luka assured Eli that he was fine and told him that if he wanted to leave, he should go. Reinforcements would arrive soon, and once they did, they would have to return to the Empire. Luka urged Eli to take his chance. Eli slowly got up, and Luka watched as he walked away. Eli came from a background of guaranteed wealth and fame, with the ability to back it up. Any citizen of the Empire would be jealous of him. Yet, Luka couldn't understand Eli. However, when Eli spoke about his dreams, it was the brightest Luka had ever seen him shine. So, Luka hoped that Eli would live as he truly desired, following his heart. Moments later, a hand pressed a cloth against Luka's wound. It was Eli. "What are you doing?" Eli asked. Eli sighed, admitting that seeing Luka act this way made him worry he might actually die. He added that there was no way he could live guilt-free if Luka died like this. Back at the base, Luka was reading a book when Eli suddenly appeared behind him, asking if he was looking at new parts. Eli then pointed at something in the book that he wanted to recommend to Luka. Annoyed, Luka scolded him. "Stop sneaking up on me like that." After returning to the Empire and completing his treatment, Luka was summoned by various departments for investigation. They wanted to question him about the case involving the deaths of 3 cadets and an Imperial Guard member. At first, Luka assumed they were looking into the Korite Paladin encounter, but he soon realized he had been called for a different reason. Eli later explained that an artifact had been discovered at the site they visited, and there were heated disputes over its ownership. When Luka asked who was collecting the artifact, Eli replied that a retrieval team composed solely of specialists had been assembled for the task. Eli added that if the Holy Alliance refused to surrender the historic site and the artifact, a massive war would likely break out. If the Empire went to battle against the Korra, the Bellado would profit simply by watching the two sides fight. Luka, uninterested, responded that politics didn't concern him. He just wanted to follow orders and fight. That, he expressed, was what a member of the Imperial Guard was supposed to do. The Imperial Guard. When Luka reported that one of its members had his head blown off, the captain dismissed it as nothing more than a phantom phenomenon caused by residual signals. But Luka wondered, was it really just a residual signal? The Imperial Guard had reacted to his words even after he died. There were still unanswered questions, but Luka wasn't foolish enough to dig into information that headquarters refused to disclose. Within the cadet training facilities, there was one extravagant location that felt out of place, the visiting room. It was designed for cadets to meet with friends and family. Since Luka had grown up in a nursery school, he never expected to visit that room. Naturally, he never thought anyone would come looking for him either. So why was Claude's sister, Lillian Ramones, there to see him? Luka assumed that Lillian had come to question him about Claude's death since he had been the leader at the time. However, Lillian quickly reassured him that she wasn't there to express hatred toward him. She clarified that she wanted to see Luka because her brother had spoken about him often. Claude had described Luka as a talented friend among the other cadets and had even asked Lillian if she was interested in meeting him. She also mentioned that she knew where Luka came from and personally preferred that background. Luka smirked. "It almost sounds like you are interested in meeting me." He knew nothing about Lillian, so she suggested they start getting to know each other. She added that she believed Luka had much to gain from this. After all, plenty of people would be jealous of him. It's another offer Luka has no reason to refuse. Someone like him receiving the opportunity to marry a woman with such a strong background is a golden chance. If he can marry a noblewoman and get closer to his goal, nothing could be better. However, this opportunity seems almost too easy, which makes him more reluctant. Luka told Lillian that he would have to refuse, then said goodbye. Luka once thought Eli was foolish for trying to escape from the Empire. However, he never imagined he would be reckless enough to make a decision based on mere feelings. He is certain that Lillian will take this as an insult to her noble status and hopes nothing troublesome will come of it. But suddenly, Lillian takes his hand and admits that she may have rushed. With a blushing face, she suggests that they start as friends. Then, she turns around and runs off, calling out that she will return soon. At that moment, Luka realizes that Lillian will not be easy to get rid of. In the Akresha physical training room, the Accretion Imperial Guard's fighting instructor, Quinuan, never expected Luka to seek him out. When Luka expressed his desire to learn from him, Quinuan simply replied that Luka was already skilled and that there was nothing more he could teach him. However, Luka insisted that being the best among the cadets was not enough. Although Quinuan was strong, he was not as domineering as the other instructors. He relied on a low-power everyday augment, which, when compared to the new augment Luka had just received, should have made Luka 10 times stronger. However, Luka's biggest disadvantage was the lack of a full-body augmentation, making him significantly weaker in comparison. Luka believes that if he cannot defeat an opponent like Quinuan, he will have no chance against someone as strong as the Korite Paladin. With no other choice, Quinuan tells Luka to bring it on. As the fight begins, Quinuan asks if Luka wants to test out his new augment. Luka knows that while Quinuan may be a retired Imperial Guard, he would not even flinch against an attack like this. Deciding to close the distance quickly, Luka prepares to leap toward Quinuan and end the fight with a decisive strike. Luka grabs Quinuan's sleeve, and as he prepares to throw his punch, he is already convinced of his victory. However, just as his fist nears Quinuan's face, he is suddenly flipped into the air. Confused, he wonders how he ended up there. Still determined, Luka refuses to let this setback stop him. He quickly regains his footing and attempts to kick Quinuan, but Quinuan catches his foot and effortlessly throws him away again. Shocked, Luka struggles to understand what is happening. Quinuan approaches him and states that not only has Luka failed to gauge the strength of his opponent, but he also allowed his mind to be distracted during the fight. He then questions Luka, asking why he is in such a rush. From Luka's perspective, his first attack should have landed squarely on Quinuan's chin. However, the moment Quinuan touched his arm, Luka's body staggered as if he had lost control. To be precise, the kinetic energy he had directed at Quinuan was reflected back, sending a shock through his own body. When Luka asked about it, Quinuan explained that it was a self-defense technique of his. Curious, Luka asked if he could learn it, but Quinuan simply raised his hand in response and questioned whether Luka still wanted to, even after seeing him in this state. Drops of blood had begun to stain the floor. Quinuan asked Luka what he had learned from their battle. Luka replied that it felt as if he had been charmed. His body had moved on its own, completely beyond his control. Quinuan then introduced the technique as Archi's Victima, commonly known as the Archi's combat method. He explained that there were 3 major drawbacks to using it. Luka quickly deduced that one of them was its difficulty to learn. When asked about the others, he guessed that experiencing brain-related issues must be one of the side effects. Quinuan confirmed this and added that the final drawback was something Luka could not yet know. However, Luka remained resolute, declaring that if it meant becoming stronger, he was willing to accept the risks. But Quinuan dismissed his resolve, stating that it was not Luka's decision to make. He reminded Luka that he was already an asset of the Empire, and a significant amount of money had been invested in him. Before Luka could respond, Quinuan pressed him to answer his question. Training in the Archi's combat method inevitably caused issues in the brain. He asked Luka if he could swear to him that he would stop using it. Luka replied that he couldn't swear by it, but he would try his best not to use it. Quinuan chuckled, saying he liked Luka's honesty, then patted his shoulder. Without warning, he suddenly twisted Luka's body and threw him behind him. Quinuan then advised Luka to always anticipate an attack from him from now on. That way, he would learn to be prepared for any situation. Luka was glad. He understood that this meant Quinuan had agreed to train him. A few weeks had passed when Eli asked Luka if he was getting enough sleep. Luka replied that he had just been busy. It had been a month since he started sparring with Quinuan daily. However, Quinuan hadn't directly taught him anything. Instead, he wanted Luka to observe and learn on his own. Most combat methods focus on mastering specific techniques and refining them. In contrast, the Archi's combat method is designed to maximize the effectiveness of a fighter's existing skills. It functions as a superior combat algorithm, utilizing all available techniques and adapting them in real time to create the most efficient fighting style within seconds. Ultimately, it is a method that relies on the power of the mind. Luka asked Eli how his mission had gone. Eli replied that it was boring. just the task of eliminating a malfunctioning android. Lately, all the missions he had been receiving felt like child's play to him. Eli then mentioned that he had heard some things from his family. If the chief centurion had to step in, it meant something serious, at the very least, a rebellion. He added that while he didn't have all the details, a group of people had indeed plotted an uprising. Luka was furious. They were already at war with the Korite alliance, and now some fool wanted to start a civil war. How stupid! Eli responded that if problems like this were simply dismissed as stupidity, they would fester from within. Hearing that, Luka shoved Eli against the wall. He warned him that while he could overlook Eli's desire to leave the Empire, if he ever chose to become an enemy, Luka wouldn't let it slide. Eli calmly explained that he had also passed the aptitude test to become an Imperial Guard and simply believed this was an important matter for the Empire. He then told Luka to calm down. Luka warned him not to make statements that could incite suspicion. Eli acknowledged this, assuring him that he only spoke this way in front of Luka. Then, with a grin, he told Luka to lighten up and offered to treat him to a meal over the weekend. But Luka brushed him off, saying he already had plans. Annoyed, he told Eli not to talk to him, as he was irritating. In the Akresha lower sector, Quinuan led Luka to a place that was all too familiar to both of them, having come from the slums. Luka remarked that ever since he became a trainee, he never thought he would have to return to the lower sector. He hadn't expected Quinuan to bring him there when he told him to make plans. The air in the lower sector was foul. During Luka's younger days, he had felt an urgent need to escape, believing that if he stayed, he would remain a nobody for the rest of his life. As they continued walking, they entered the black market, a place Luka had never been before. He was astonished that Quinuan, despite having served as an Imperial Guard for decades, knew the area better than he did. Luka wondered what Quinuan was planning, especially since he had instructed him to use prosthetic arms and legs with low energy output for this trip. Moments later, Quinuan told Luka to get ready. They slowly approached the entrance, where two guards stood watch. When one of the guards ordered them to stop, Quinuan explained that he needed to speak with the supervisor of the establishment. When asked if he knew their boss, Aleph, Quinuan replied that he didn't, but he wanted to meet him. The guard took offense and raised his gun at Quinuan. Before he could react, Luka swiftly disabled his movement. As the second guard reached for his weapon, Luka had already stolen the first guard's gun and aimed it at him, warning him not to move. Assessing the situation, Quinuan calmly instructed the guard to summon Aleph immediately. Luka then turned to Quinuan and asked what kind of place they had just walked into. Quinuan smirked and replied, "This is the hottest place in the entire empire, the Coliseum." Luka and Quinuan entered the room and met the boss, Aleph. Quinuan requested that Aleph put Luka in the match, adding that he did not need a cut and had no concerns if Luka died in the fight. Luka now realized why Quinuan had told him to come with a low-output body. Aleph flicked his cigarette toward Quinuan's face, but Luka caught it. Aleph's bodyguards immediately aimed their guns at Luka and Quinuan. Aleph then stated that they had not been allowed in to have their request granted. They had been summoned to a place where disposing of a corpse was easy. Luka believed it was a bluff. If Aleph had no intention of hearing them out, he would have already shot them. 3 gunmen stood directly in front of them, aiming their weapons, while 2 more armed gang members waited outside the room. Quinuan questioned Aleph about what had happened to the previous owner. Surprised that Quinuan knew Torah, Aleph explained that he had died after being caught rigging matches. However, Quinuan knew the truth. Aleph had killed Torah and taken over the Coliseum, recognizing it as a highly profitable business. Quinuan revealed that Torah had also killed the man before him to claim that position, stating that such things were a natural occurrence in these streets. Hearing this, Aleph pointed his gun at Quinuan and demanded to know how he had learned all of it. With a serious expression, Quinuan told him to calm down unless he wanted to end up next to Torah again. Fear flickered across Aleph's face, and he slowly lowered his weapon before returning to his seat. He then clarified that all he needed to do was put the brat into a match. Aleph scanned Luka's body and quickly noticed that his arms and legs were not combat models, and his torso remained organic. He was convinced that Luka would be crushed to a bloody pulp within seconds. Aleph said he could put Luka into a match but asked if Quinuan had something to offer in return. Quinuan replied that he knew where Torah had kept his safe and was also aware that Aleph had Torah's eye. This revelation made Aleph wonder just how much Quinuan truly knew. His curiosity about Quinuan's identity grew. With a calm expression, Quinuan responded that he was merely a spirit of the past, nothing Aleph needed to worry about. He then stated that Luka required no special treatment and urged Aleph to pair him against his best fighter. Luka watched in awe, realizing how effortlessly Quinuan had seized control of the situation without even moving a muscle. In the coliseum waiting room, Luka questioned what was in Tora's safe that had caused Aleph's attitude to change so suddenly. Quinuan replied that it contained Tora's hidden treasure. Luka then asked what Quinuan had planned if a fight had broken out. Quinuan simply responded that he would explain after Luka won. He then revealed Luka's opponent, Gabriel, the Steel Fist. Quinuan explained that the Coliseum was filled with fools who used illegal mods at the cost of their lifespan. He warned Luka that, with his current body, a single hit could be fatal. He then advised Luka to remember what he was about to say. It was the fundamental principle of the Archi's combat method. Be satisfied with what you have. Luka scoffed, stating that he had always believed satisfaction meant defeat. Quinuan, unfazed, replied, "Water does not lose. It merely changes its form." He then told Luka that he had real potential and revealed that he had been watching him ever since he deflected a bullet without a ballistic predictor. Luka dismissed the remark as unfounded praise. Quinuan smirked. "Of course," he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "This might be the last time I see you." The time had come. Luka walked slowly toward the arena, his footsteps steady and deliberate. The announcer's voice boomed across the Coliseum, mocking him as "good boy," a brat still sucking his mother's milk. The crowd erupted into jeers and laughter, hurling insults and questioning who had allowed such an idiot into the ring. Their amusement quickly turned to excitement as they anticipated a slaughter. A human's dark desire, to witness flesh torn and blood spilled, fueled their cheers. That same desire was now pushing Luka forward. He could feel it. They truly wanted to see his limbs ripped off, his face mutilated. Good. This was exactly what Luka wanted. He could sense it. He was finally back home. With a confident smile, he stepped into the ring. He didn't remember ever feeling full as a child. An official from the Empire would stop by twice a month to deliver supplies, but the orphanage principal always sold more than half to line his own pockets. Even when Luka was starving, he never stopped training. He read every book he could find and lifted chunks of iron to strengthen his muscles. The other children called him foolish for wasting his energy, claiming he was only making himself hungrier. But Luka simply replied that he trained because power would allow him to take more when he was hungry. He understood the laws of the world well. Strength meant survival, and the weak were destined to starve. At 12, he took the second aptitude test and earned a place on the list of potential Imperial Guard trainees. By 15, he had officially become one. For most of his time as a trainee, he forgot about the orphanage. He believed he would never have to return. Back in the present, Luka faced Gabriel in the ring as the crowd chanted Gabriel's name. Gabriel scoffed, thinking Aleph must have been on something today to match him against a brat. Gabriel, the Steel Fist. His limbs came from different manufacturers, with no regard for symmetry or balance. His spine curved under the weight of his modifications, but that only made him more formidable. His body existed for one purpose: raw power. He glanced at Luka's face and noted that it wasn't too bad. With a smirk, he asked if Luka would serve him at night. Luka returned the smile. "I suppose you'll need a servant soon," he said. "Because after today, you're going to be crippled." Gabriel turned his back with a chuckle. "I'll smash you into the ground until you're begging to be my servant." Now, the miniature version of the kill or be killed world begins. Will Luka be crushed? Or will he triumph? The slaughter show starts now. Gabriel's body was modified solely for combat, while Luka relied on non-combat parts. That meant one thing: if Gabriel landed a single hit, Luka would die instantly. Gabriel launched the first attack, but Luka swiftly evaded his punch. Without hesitation, Luka countered with a kick to Gabriel's face. However, Gabriel only grinned. What was that? A ticklish little kick, he mocked. Luka smirked. If he had proper combat parts, Gabriel would have exploded like an overripe fruit. Stepping back, Luka tried to put some distance between them. But the stadium was too cramped, there was nowhere to run. He understood the harsh reality of the fight. Every one of Gabriel's attacks was lethal, while his own barely did any damage. Even the audience wasn't on his side. This was the situation he had been thrown into. Luka wondered, what did Quinuan want from him when he brought him here? Wishing for something he didn't have wouldn't change anything. Praying wouldn't make a gun fall from the sky. No matter how little he had to fight with it. Quinuan had taken Luca's limbs, but he had allowed him to keep his eyes. That meant Quinuan didn't expect him to overpower Gabriel with sheer strength. Acceptance. Archi combat was about using what one had to its fullest potential. Gabriel's fists were like destructive cannons. The small tremors in his shoulder acted as the trigger, the direction of his gaze was the barrel, and the length of his arm determined the range. To Luca, it was slow, far slower than a real gun. And its trajectory? Obvious. The audience and Quinuan were astonished by what they were witnessing. To Quinuan, Luca appeared to be a prodigy. In his eyes, Luca had already mastered Archi's combat through sheer talent. Now, Quinuan eagerly anticipated Luca's full display of potential. The spectators erupted in disbelief, demanding an explanation from Gabriel as to how he was struggling against a mere child. Luca's concentration had reached unprecedented levels, so refined that he could predict Gabriel's attacks with absolute precision. A thought crossed his mind. Could he truly execute such a feat at this moment? As the battle intensified, Luca found himself exhilarated. A sudden realization struck him. This was exactly how Quinuan had been scrutinizing his abilities. Enraged, Gabriel sneered, claiming he had no idea what kind of sorcery Luca had employed, but he was certain that Luca's feeble attacks were ineffective against him. With remarkable agility, Luca evaded Gabriel's powerful strike and confronted him. He asked whether Gabriel truly believed his attacks were useless. He then declared that if raw power alone was insufficient, he would simply compensate with something else. In a swift motion, Luca leapt above Gabriel, grasped his head, and twisted it with force. Turning to the stunned audience, Luca proclaimed that they could remain there, waiting endlessly for his downfall. As for him, he would continue to ascend, higher and higher, until their voices could no longer reach him. Luca emerged victorious in his match against Gabriel. He acknowledged that if this had been a battlefield with numerous variables, maintaining such intense focus would have been nearly impossible. Now, he had no choice but to admit it. Quinuan was a great teacher. Quinuan congratulated Luca and welcomed him to his induction into Archi's Victima. Upon glancing at Quinuan's hand, Luca noticed a credit chip being offered to him. Curious, he asked Quinuan if it was his payout for the fight. However, Quinuan shook his head and explained that it was for Gabriel's hospital bills. He advised Luca to give it to Gabriel, adding that showing generosity isn't a bad idea, as long as it doesn't make you a fool. Luca frowned and replied that he wanted to be a soldier and a warrior, not a good Samaritan. Quinuan patted Luca's head and remarked that he was still quite naive when it came to interpersonal relationships. He then elaborated that the kindness he spoke of wasn't charity but an investment, something to be built up for the future when it could prove useful. Finally, he advised Luca to remember that creating an advantageous environment for oneself is the mark of a true soldier. Luca was deeply mistaken about Quinuan. He believed that Quinuan was mentoring him out of admiration for his talent and a sense of kinship, given that they both came from the gutters. However, Luca was convinced that Quinuan's generosity was not without expectation, that one day, Quinuan would come to collect on his investment in a way Luca would have no choice but to accept. At the hospital, the doctor explained the issues with Gabriel's mechanical body and recommended a solution that could help him get back on his feet. Gabriel was shocked upon hearing the suggestion. He couldn't afford the latest model the doctor was recommending. Seeing his reaction, the doctor sighed and explained that if Gabriel had at least considered compatibility from the start, an older model would have been sufficient. While Gabriel and the doctor were talking, Luca stood outside the door, quietly listening. Eventually, he stepped inside and asked Gabriel how he was doing. The moment Gabriel saw Luca, better known as Good Boy, his rage flared. He swore that he would kill him. Luca, unfazed, simply smiled and reminded Gabriel that he had warned him before the fight. He had said he was going to cripple him. After that, Luca turned his attention to the doctor and inquired about the latest model he had mentioned. Taking out the credit chips, he asked the doctor if the amount was sufficient to cover the cost. The doctor nodded and confirmed that it was. Gabriel shouted at Luca, demanding to know what he was doing. Luca simply replied that he was paying Gabriel's bills. Confused, Gabriel asked why, to which Luca casually responded that he just felt like it. That was enough for Gabriel to conclude that Good Boy wasn't just a stage name. Curious, he then asked for Luca's real name, and Luca revealed it. Afterward, Gabriel told Luca that if he ever needed help, he only had to ask. Gabriel would make sure to repay his debt. At the Akresha physical training grounds, Luka and Eli were sparring. When Eli attempted to kick Luka, Luka blocked the attack, twisted Eli around, and followed up with a punch. After their sparring session, Eli asked Luka if he had learned the Archi's combat method from instructor Quinuan, to which Luka confirmed. From what Eli knew, that method was typically used by thugs, techniques like holding glass shards between fingers or throwing dirt into an opponent's eyes. Accepting his defeat, Eli admitted that he could no longer dream of beating Luka in hand-to-hand combat. However, Luka reassured him, saying that he was the only trainee who could still put up a fight. Hearing this, Eli noticed that Luka seemed rather happy today. Curious, he asked if Luka would mind helping him out if he wasn't busy, to which Luka simply replied, "Sure." At the Akresha Imperial Guard trainee barracks, in the visiting room, Eli brought Luka along to meet with Lillian. Apologetically, Eli explained to Luka that his family had always been on good terms with the Ramones family, so he couldn't refuse the meeting. Lillian then asked Luka why he had been avoiding her. Luka replied bluntly that he simply wasn't interested and had hoped she would take that as his way of refusing. Eli sighed and suggested that Luka could have put things a little more nicely. Annoyed, Luka snapped at him to shut up, adding that the situation itself was already frustrating him. Hearing that, Lillian questioned Luka, asking what he hated so much about her. Luka explained that he had no time to entertain a relationship. Unlike her, he was an orphan. If he lost his footing, there would be no way for him to climb back up. He further elaborated that relying on her noble status would mean putting himself in a position where she could take everything away on a whim. He intended to rise through the ranks on his own abilities. Finally, Luka clarified that he interacted with Eli not because he was from the Karthika family, but because he was a friend, someone he could entrust his life to in combat. When Lillian asked Luka if he truly had no intention of giving her even a single chance, Luka replied with a curt, "Unfortunately," before adding that he hoped she wouldn't visit him again. With that, he turned his back and began to walk away. However, Eli called out to him, saying there was no need to be so harsh. He then asked Luka why he disliked Lillian so much. Luka responded bluntly, it was because he couldn't understand why Lillian Ramones was interested in him. She was approaching a nobody like him just because Claude, who was now dead, had spoken highly of him. To Luka, that seemed suspicious, making him think she had some ulterior motive. Eli sighed, concluding that, in other words, Luka was afraid because he didn't know the reason behind Lillian's actions. He advised Luka to take things slow. But suddenly, Luka turned the tables on him. He asked if Eli liked Lillian. He explained that he could tell, from Eli's gaze, his breathing, and how panicked he had been just moments ago. Fixing Eli with a serious stare, Luka reiterated that he wasn't interested and told Eli to cut the bullshit and take his own shot. Eli took a step back. After Luka left, he muttered to himself, "It's impossible for me." At the top of a building, surrounded by intense heat, Luka meditated, reminding himself that he needed to stay calm no matter the situation. As he focused, he recalled a conversation with Quinuan. Luka had asked how he would have handled the fight that broke out in the gang's office. At the time, armed thugs were positioned both inside and outside, and Luka couldn't see a way to escape unscathed without a weapon. Quinuan explained that he would have ducked under the table as soon as the fight started. Luka, however, pointed out a flaw in that strategy. Aleph and his thugs all carried guns. If his first move was to hide, he'd lose any chance to strike back. Quinuan simply smiled and explained that he knew Luka wouldn't hesitate to seize that opportunity to take the gang down, even if it meant taking a few bullets in the process. Luka questioned, "What if I hadn't been there? What if I had decided to run away or hide?" Quinuan replied calmly, saying he knew Luka had planned to take Aleph hostage and seize his gun. Luka had been trained to maximize his aggressiveness, and Quinuan was certain he had already envisioned how he would take them down. However, Quinuan pointed out a fatal flaw. If Luka had taken Aleph hostage, they both would have been shot. In that world, it wasn't unusual for gang bosses to be replaced. All Luka would have done was give them an excuse to kill their own leader. Quinuan then added that once Luka became the target of those guns, he himself would have taken them down and escaped with Luka through a secret passage. Hearing this, Luka was left in awe. He realized he couldn't even begin to fathom the extent of Quinuan's foresight. Quinuan explained that in a long-forgotten language, Archies meant keen eyes. The Archies Victima technique utilized every possible resource of the brain to enhance insight. Luca quickly deduced the drawback. Pushing the brain to its limits must have caused the issues Quinuan experienced. Then, another realization struck him. If he equipped the Legion, he wouldn't be able to use Archies Victima. Seeing Luca piece it together so quickly, Quinuan smiled. "You really are sharp," he said. He had expected Luca to take a few more months to figure it out. Once Luca became an Imperial Guard, he would be bestowed a Legion, the full-body mechanical armor crafted with the Empire's most advanced technology. However, no one could wear a Legion indefinitely. It was a cybernetic system that operated using high-bandwidth memory signals. In addition to its powerful CPUs providing assistance, it required all available cognitive resources from the user's brain. That meant there would be no extra capacity to use Archies Victima while wearing the Legion. Quinuan had deliberately kept this from Luca, knowing how he would react. As expected, Luca's expression darkened. "If I had known Archies Victima couldn't be used with the Legion, I would never have learned it," he muttered. Quinuan simply asked, "So this is how it ends?" Luca gave a formal nod. "Thank you for your teachings, Instructor Quinuan." Quinuan smiled knowingly. "Come back when you change your mind." It had been 3 months since Luca last visited the Chief Centurion's office. The Chief Centurion, Hylas Custoria, greeted him, explaining that he had been quite busy and hadn't had the chance to meet with the trainees. He then asked Luca how he had been doing. Luca replied that he had been training on his own, as he hadn't been assigned a mission for a while. Hylas nodded and told Luca that he wouldn't be receiving any proper missions for some time, because he was already skilled enough to act as a real force for them. Then, Hylas mentioned that he had heard Luca had been interacting with Instructor Quinuan quite often. Hearing that, Luca immediately thought, "So this must be the real reason he called me here." The higher-ups had likely figured everything out: Luca's visit to the lower sector's black market, his participation in the coliseum, all of it. Hylas then asked him directly, "Have you been training to use Archies Victima under Quinuan?" Luca responded calmly, "Not anymore." Hylas nodded, easily guessing that Luca had been the one to quit. Since Archies Victima couldn't be used with the Legion, he considered it meaningless for anyone in the Imperial Guard. "Quinuan throws out those who lack talent," Hylas continued, "and those who do have talent eventually realize they have no reason to keep learning it." That was why, in the entire Imperial Guard, Quinuan remained the sole user of Archies Victima. Luca asked Hylas if he wanted him to continue learning Archies Victima. To be precise, Hylas's main concern was for Luca to maintain a good relationship with Quinuan. For that reason, he believed Luca should continue his training. Hearing this made Luca wonder, was the Chief Centurion wary of Instructor Quinuan? Why was he so on edge about a soldier who had retired from combat? Luca responded to Hylas, acknowledging his order. In return, Hylas reminded Luca to keep in mind that he was being watched closely. He knew Luca was the type to climb high. At the store, Quinuan remarked that he hadn't expected Luca to return so soon. He then reminded Luca that he had told him to come back anytime and decided not to ask any further questions. In Luca's mind, he had assumed Quinuan wouldn't agree to teach him again, yet Quinuan accepted surprisingly easily. Curious, Luca asked why they were in the lower sector today. Quinuan explained that when he was younger, he used to spend his time staring at these. Then, without hesitation, he turned to the shop owner and said, "I'll take all the toys here." Both the owner and Luca were stunned. Luca couldn't help but wonder, why was Quinuan buying all those toys? Quinuan and Luca went to the 47th orphanage in the lower sector. Quinuan instructed Luca to place the box in the inner field and then take a break. Moments later, Gabriel arrived, carrying more boxes, and questioned Luca for calling him over for something so trivial. Luca reminded Gabriel that he had previously said Luca could ask for his help. However, Gabriel clarified that he meant for something bigger, like a fight against another gang. Luca scoffed, saying he didn't need Gabriel's help in a fight. Glancing at Quinuan, Gabriel asked Luca who the man was. Luca simply replied that if he were Gabriel, he'd keep his nose out of it, unless he wanted to lose his head. Luca observed that the place they were in was likely the orphanage where Quinuan had grown up, and that he was giving back now simply because he had made it out. As the children noticed them, they came running over excitedly. Luca and Gabriel began handing out the boxes of toys one by one. Watching two kids fight over a box, Luca silently told them in his mind, "Conquer with power. Nothing is fair. So strengthen yourself if there's something you want. This world isn't generous enough for everyone to be happy. Moments later, Quinuan called Luka over, saying he wanted to talk. He shared that he stops by the lower sector from time to time. The pay here isn't great, so judging by how chubby the orphanage principal is, he must be doing a good job smuggling supplies out. Luka asked Quinuan if he had grown up here. Quinuan replied that he had long forgotten such things. He just stopped by a nearby orphanage occasionally. In fact, he might have even visited the one Luka grew up in. At this moment, Quinuan seemed like any ordinary retired soldier, one stripped of his former glory. A man whose nervous system had broken down, unable to withstand the overload, leaving damage to his brain. Then, Quinuan abruptly shifted the conversation. "Let's get to the point," he said. His expression darkened as he suddenly asked, "Who ordered you to come back to me?" His gaze turned sharp and menacing. Was it Captain Hylas? Upon hearing Quinuan's question, Luka avoided meeting his gaze. He knew that with Quinuan's sharp insight, even the slightest action could serve as a clue. Luka wondered, how did Quinuan know the orders came from the chief centurion? If Quinuan was truly hiding something dangerous, something significant enough for the chief centurion to keep tabs on him, then he might decide to eliminate Luka right now. Suddenly, Quinuan advised Luka to calm down if he wanted to stay alive. He warned him that if Luka attacked with full force, restraining him without killing him would be difficult. Luka could only respond, "I am a soldier of the Empire. That is all I can say." He knew so little that he wasn't even sure which side he should take. But Quinuan didn't intend to blame him. He simply stated that it was only natural for a soldier to follow orders from their superiors. With a knowing look, Quinuan added, "You truly are the ideal soldier the Empire seeks." Quinuan asked Luka, "When you first came to me, did you really believe it was of your own free will?" When Luka performed projectile trajectory manipulation without an assisting processor, the higher-ups had already begun making their preparations. At last, they had found someone capable of learning Archi's victima, just like Quinuan. Quinuan continued, explaining that while Luka might have believed he sought him out on his own after that incident in Korra, it was actually the Empire's calculations that led them to meet. But Luka refused to be swayed by Quinuan's words. He convinced himself that he had met a powerful foe on his mission and realized he needed more strength. That was why he had searched through the records of instructors, found someone to help him, and made his own choice. This was his decision. This was his own free will. Luka told Quinuan that it was his choice. Quinuan responded with a knowing look. Every man in this world is someone's slave. The only difference is whether they realize it or not. He continued, "Right now, you probably want to run away from the truth. And that's understandable. You're still young, after all." Then, with a dismissive tone, he added, "Go on back. If you want to report to Hylas, feel free to do so." Luka refused to believe Quinuan's words. And yet, as Quinuan had pointed out, Chief Centurion Hylas did want him to continue learning Archi's victima. He reminded himself, "Don't doubt the Empire. All I want is success. Don't let Quinuan's words sway you. Don't think about it. Don't question it. Don't doubt." In the simulation training room, Luka was unable to report to Chief Centurion Hylas that day. He believed that if he did, they would have forced him to undergo a psychological evaluation due to the suspicion that he had been influenced by a dangerous ideology. Given his current state of confusion, his results would likely be worse than before. The Empire does not tolerate those who harbor dangerous ideologies. In the worst-case scenario, Luka could be dismissed from his position as an Imperial Guard and sent to a forced labor camp. Luka suspected that Quinuan had anticipated his hesitation to report the incident. If he truly intended to inform Hylas, he needed to prepare to pass the psychological evaluation. And to do that, he had to meet Eli first. Eli emerged from the capsule as Luka suddenly handed him a bottle of water. Eli asked if Luka had come all the way just to cheer him on. Luka replied that, obviously, he had a request. He then reminded Eli of his previous statement about prestigious families rigging the aptitude tests. Eli explained that it was a well-known secret, though unqualified candidates never made it past the training. Luka then questioned how Eli had managed to pass the psychological portion of the tests. In response, Eli warned him that such a question was incredibly dangerous to ask. Luka reassured him, stating that he had already checked and confirmed that no one else was around. He added that he was doing this for the sake of the Empire. Eli hesitated before telling Luka that he wouldn't ask why he needed this information. With a resigned expression, he admitted there was no other way. Eli instructed Luka to create a simplified version of his ego to interact with the outside world while placing his true ego as an observer within himself. Essentially, they were sealing away the parts of their ego they wanted to hide. That was how one passed the psychological exam. Luka looked confused, so Eli elaborated. He explained that there were cases of ordinary people losing their memories or experiencing personality changes due to trauma. What they were doing was simply a conscious version of that process. Still skeptical, Luka questioned whether such a thing was even possible. Eli clarified that the human brain constantly exists in a state of confusion. If someone consistently acted like a loyal soldier, then over time, the identity of a loyal soldier would naturally take shape on the surface of their mind. 2 months before the aptitude tests began, Eli had woken up every day and recited prayers of gratitude to the Emperor, mimicking his father's routine. However, he warned Luka that doing this for too long could destabilize one's true ego, to the point of forgetting who they really were. Luka considered this for a moment. In his case, if this was Eli's method, then he didn't need to pretend to be anyone else. He only had to act like his past self, the version of him who had received a high score on the psychological exam. The Luka from before he met Eli and Quinuan. Eli told Luka that he had no idea what he was trying to do but advised him to be careful. Tampering with the psychological exam was extremely dangerous. Luka scoffed, replying that he never thought he would hear such a warning from Eli of all people. Moments later, Luka received a call from Quinuan. The two of them headed together to the lower sector. As they arrived, Quinuan informed Luka that today's training was an action exercise, and a fairly simple one at that. He remarked that the building was surprisingly well constructed for a gang hideout. While listening, Luka couldn't help but notice that Quinuan was treating him exactly the same, as if the incident at the orphanage had never happened. And that, more than anything, made him feel even worse. Then, without hesitation, Quinuan turned to him and said, "You have 20 seconds to take down every gang member inside the building." After hearing Quinuan's instructions, Luka broke the door open and slowly walked inside. The gang members turned to him, confused by his sudden entrance. One of them, armed with a gun, approached and demanded to know what he wanted. Luka quickly assessed the situation: 3 armed thugs, one man who appeared to be their leader, and another presence he could sense coming from the bathroom. As the gang member spoke, he raised his gun toward Luka. But before he could react, Luka struck him with a powerful punch, sending him flying into the ceiling. The remaining 3 gang members stood frozen in shock before scrambling to grab their weapons. Luka exhaled and cracked his knuckles. "A lot has been on my mind lately," he said. "Let me blow off some steam." The gun held by the man on the ceiling slipped from his grasp, falling until Luka caught it. Without hesitation, Luka fired at the 3 gang members, disarming them. The gang boss quickly drew his own weapon and opened fire, but Luka evaded every bullet with ease. Seizing the opportunity, Luka turned his gun on the boss and swiftly neutralized him. Moments later, another gang member emerged from the restroom, puzzled by the commotion. His eyes widened at the sight of his comrades sprawled across the floor, with Luka standing over the gang boss, gun in hand. Luka calmly advised the newcomer that if he were in his shoes, he would knock himself unconscious rather than risk losing his hard-earned limbs. Without a moment's hesitation, the gang member complied, using the electric weapon he was holding to render himself unconscious. After the gang member knocked himself out, Luka still sensed someone inside the restroom. Cautiously, he stepped inside and was shocked to find a young woman, undressed, trembling, and seemingly the victim of abuse. Outside, Quinuan casually noted that Luka had taken about 12 seconds to finish the job. Clapping his hands, he praised Luka for his efficiency. Luka, however, scowled and asked if they couldn't just kill the bastards responsible. Quinuan shook his head and reminded him that they were outsiders. Any further interference would disrupt the established rules of this place. He went on, stating that countless people in the world lacked the power to defend themselves, and Luka was well aware of what happened to those who couldn't fight back. This woman had suffered such a fate because she lacked the strength to resist. Meanwhile, Luka had struggled for power his entire life, climbing his way to the top just to avoid ending up like her. Normally, he would dismiss people like her as fools, those who had failed to seize the opportunities offered by the Empire. But at that moment, he felt nothing but disgust. Not toward her, but toward the cruel and unforgiving structure of their society. From that day on, Quinuan continued taking Luka to the lower sectors, repeatedly throwing him into fights without any prior warning. But he wasn't doing it to teach Luka how to win. Winning was never the lesson. What Luka needed to grasp was how to optimize the situations he was thrust into. Identifying an opponent's capabilities was a basic rule of combat, but that alone wasn't enough. Luka had to go beyond that, analyzing his surroundings, adapting in real time, and determining the most effective course of action. And so, Quinuan kept sending him into battle, offering no explanations, no guidance, only the fight itself. At the repair shop, Gilda, the woman Luka had saved, warmly welcomed Quinuan and Luka as they arrived. Quinuan casually asked her to bring them both a cup of coffee. Luka, however, turned to Quinuan and questioned whether there was any real need to stop by Gilda's workshop. In response, Quinuan reminded him that Gilda was the woman he had rescued. Didn't he feel even the slightest sense of pride, seeing her working so hard to rebuild her life? Not long ago, Luka had pulled Gilda from the clutches of a gang. She had shared her story with them. It was a grim tale of abduction and months of suffering at the hands of her captors. Yet, despite everything, her mind had remained intact, allowing her to return to a semblance of normalcy. As for why she had been kidnapped in the first place, it had nothing to do with her. A so-called friend of hers, who had stolen money from the gang, had sought refuge at her home. When the gang came looking for him, she was the one they took instead. In the end, the person responsible for her suffering, the so-called friend, was already dead. Quinuan explained that Gilda had grown up in an orphanage and had shown exceptional talent in mechanical engineering from a young age. Seeing her potential, he had secretly funded her education, though they had kept it anonymous so she would never know. Moments later, Gabriel arrived, visibly surprised to see Luka there as well. After Luka and Quinuan had saved Gilda, Quinuan had introduced her to Gabriel. From that point on, Gabriel had taken on the role of her bodyguard, while she became his personal mechanic. Gabriel wasted no time addressing Luka, asking if he was the one who had been stirring up trouble lately. He wanted to know what Luka was thinking, adding that the gang bosses were already discussing making a move against him. If they decided to act, even Gabriel wouldn't be able to guarantee Gilda's safety. Quinuan, however, remained unfazed. He assured Gabriel that there was no need to worry, the gangs wouldn't be able to come there for a while. When Gilda asked how long exactly, Quinuan estimated that it could be a few months or even a few years. Luka wouldn't be able to return either. His superiors would never allow a trainee to leave on his own. This visit might be the last time he would see them. Despite everything she had endured, Gilda had come to terms with her reality and continued her work. Gabriel, too, pressed forward, taking on more risks in his own line of work. Luka told himself not to pity them. Being unable to return, that had to be the best thing for his current situation. At the Chief Centurion's office, Luka reported to Hylas about Quinuan's continued involvement in peculiar activities. Hylas listened before offering an explanation. Quinuan had entered training at a rather late age, an opportunity he normally wouldn't have been granted. However, at the time, the Empire had been in desperate need of recruits, even if that meant accepting impurities. Chaos had spread everywhere, and exceptions had to be made. Even now, Hylas admitted, he wasn't entirely sure what kind of man Quinuan truly was. When Hylas had first joined as a fresh recruit, Quinuan had already been a key figure within the Imperial Guard. This realization led Luka to suspect that even the Chief Centurion himself lacked full access to Quinuan's records. Hylas then noted that it seemed Quinuan had taken a particular interest in Luka. He had assigned trainees to Quinuan in the past, but none had lasted long under his guidance. Luka was different, exceptional, even, but he was also in a position that left him vulnerable to negative influences. Because of this, Hylas informed Luka that he had scheduled a psychological evaluation for him. Without hesitation, Luka accepted Hylas's orders, silently reaffirming his commitment to the path ahead. Hylas spoke candidly with Luka, explaining that trainees assigned to this type of mission face only two possible outcomes. They are either eliminated to protect a secret or rise to the heart of the Imperial Guard as a reward for their contributions. Hylas expressed hope that Luka would achieve the latter. Luka responded that he merely followed orders and, if the operation succeeded, he trusted that Hylas would vouch for him. Hylas agreed, assuring Luka that if his performance met expectations, he would fully support him. In fact, Hylas declared that he would adopt Luka as his son. Hearing this, Luca was stunned. He could hardly believe that the chief centurion wished to take him in as his own. The chief centurion, Hylas Custoria, belonged to the prestigious Custoria family, one of the most renowned lineages in the empire. Before the psychological exam began, the staff noticed joy in Luca's expression and asked if something good had happened. Luca simply smiled and dismissed the question, telling them to proceed with the exam. On the other side, Eli was training intensely, delivering a series of powerful punches and kicks to the punching bag. His efforts left him breathing heavily, his body aching from the strain. Observing him, Luca noted that Eli seemed to have pushed himself to the point of exhaustion. Doubting his own eyes, Luca questioned whether this was truly the same Eli he knew. Eli, catching his breath, asked if Luca had passed the psychological exam. Luca confirmed that he had, crediting Eli for his success. However, he couldn't shake his curiosity and told Eli to let him know if there was anything he could do to help. Eli hesitated before responding that he couldn't share the details just yet, but soon, he would ask Luca for a favor. He then asked if that would be all right. Luca stared at Eli in silence for a moment before giving his answer. If Eli ever found himself in danger during combat, Luca vowed to rescue him, even if it meant risking his own life. Hearing this, Eli thanked Luca and assured him that he would explain everything soon. He could only hope that things wouldn't unfold the way he feared. Luca was curious about Eli's favor, but he didn't feel compelled to investigate it further. Now that he had performed well on the psychological exam and earned the chief centurion's trust, his focus had shifted. His new goal was to become a recognized member of the prestigious Custoria family. Meanwhile, Hylas gathered his troops and announced that they would be operating under a special military order. Their mission was to suppress the rebels who had risen against the empire. The rebellion was led by 3 families, with the Ramones family at the forefront. Upon hearing this, Luca was stunned. His expression tensed as a bead of sweat formed on his face. He turned to Eli, his mind racing. The mention of the Ramones family brought a single name to the forefront of his thoughts, Lillian Ramones. In that moment, he realized exactly what Eli's favor would be. The soldiers lined up and boarded their ship. Inside, Luca introduced himself as the leader of the 21st Suppression Army platoon. The platoon members then saluted him. Luca found it surprising that the Imperial Guard trainees were assigned as platoon leaders, an indication that the higher-ups intended to use even an uprising as a training opportunity. The platoon was divided into 2 squads, totaling 27 members, with Sergeant Kodrak serving as Luca's aide and vice platoon leader. Since they were still inexperienced, the suppression army primarily consisted of seasoned veterans. Each of them understood that they were merely being used as tools for the trainees' development. This made it unlikely for them to follow orders from a superior whose abilities they could not trust. Despite this, Luca had no choice but to take control and command them himself. Luca had considered 2 options. The first was to leave matters to Sergeant Kodrak. Even if Luca gave vague orders, Kodrak would handle them efficiently. Luca asserted his authority before the platoon, making it clear that he was their superior and expected them to follow his commands without question. He also clarified that disobedience would be considered a punishable offense. The second option was to eliminate their resistance at its root, crushing their defiance with force. Sergeant Kodrak reacted to Luca's words, placed a hand on his shoulder, and asked for a moment to speak with him in private. However, Luca swiftly removed Kodrak's hand and threw him aside. He then reprimanded him for laying hands on a superior without permission and questioned whether Kodrak took him for a fool because of his age. Luca declared that, like the rest of them, he was from the lower sectors. However, he asked if they understood why such a vast difference existed in their social standing despite that. He clarified that it was because he was immensely superior to all of them. He added that while they might not grasp this now, they soon would. One day, they would realize that he was the greatest platoon leader they would ever meet. In response, Sergeant Kodrak acknowledged his mistake and assured Luca that he would be more careful. Hearing this, Luca recognized Kodrak's keen understanding. He had realized that Luca had not chosen the easy way out. At the enemy rebel fort, within the Imperial Army outpost, Eli discovered that Luca had lost his temper and struck one of his platoon members. When questioned, Luca explained that he had simply felt his aide was treating him like a child. He believed that if a leader acted too kindly, their subordinates would not show them proper respect. Moments later, Hylas began explaining the mission plan, outlining the locations where the rebels were stationed. The entire site was surrounded by 2 walls, with a high-density force barrier forming a dome that protected the fort. Turrets, presumed to be arcane weapons, were positioned to target and shoot down aerial threats. There were 5 of these turrets in total. The 11th Armored Brigade was assigned to lead the assault and destroy them, while the rest of the army would advance from all sides. The Armored Brigade was equipped with full body armor for all its members, a testament to the Empire's commitment to overwhelming force in this suppression effort. The operation was set to begin in 1 hour and 30 minutes, and Hylas advised everyone to complete their preparations by then. After the briefing, Luka and Eli discussed their role in the operation, realizing that they were merely acting as support. Eli fell silent for a moment, seemingly hesitating before speaking. However, before he could say anything, Luka anticipated his thoughts and asked if he was trying to talk about the Ramones family. Luka warned him that if he sided with those who had committed treason, not even his family would be able to save him. In response, Eli admitted that he wasn't hoping for miracles, but if there was even the slightest chance, he wished to rescue Lillian at the very least. Luka scolded him, criticizing his willingness to risk his life for Lillian. Eli explained that she had been his first love, but she had no desire to marry a noble. Luka's expression darkened as he snapped that this was crossing the line. He reminded Eli that attempting to save Lillian was extremely dangerous and that if he were caught, he would be executed on the spot. Turning his back, Luka began to walk away, warning Eli not to do anything reckless. Eli gave a solemn nod before walking off with a serious expression. Luka knew that Eli's response was a lie. Because of the Archie's victima, he was certain that Eli was determined to rescue Lillian at any cost. However, to Luka, Eli's acceptance or denial of this truth was irrelevant. For Eli's own sake, Lillian Ramones had to die. Luka hoped it would happen amidst the chaos of battle and silently prayed that Eli would never see her alive. That was his desperate wish. Only the head and chest truly mattered. As long as those 2 areas remained intact, soldiers of the Empire could not die. As long as they could breathe and blood continued to flow to their brains, the Empire's cybernetic technology would revive them. Sergeant Kodrak approached Luka and stated that he was well aware of Luka's capabilities, having thoroughly researched the expertise of his superiors. However, what he truly wanted to say was that when they entered combat, he urged Luka to heed his words. Having served the Empire for 10 years, Kodrak believed his experience had value. He admitted that he might not be as skilled as Luka, but his abilities were far from useless. Luka assured him that there was no need to worry. He was willing to listen to anyone as long as their suggestions were valid. Hearing this, Sergeant Kodrak nodded and thanked him. Upon arrival at their destination, the troops began disembarking from the ship. They were equipped with the Armored Brigade's full-body mechanical armor, the Myrmidon model. This was Luka's first time seeing the mass-produced Myrmidon in action. Their mission was clear. Take down the turrets first, after which Luka's platoon would step in. With the command to commence fire, the troops launched into the air, flying toward the enemy base. Multiple rockets were fired at the barrier, relentlessly bombarding it until the fortress was successfully breached. Now, everything depended on whether they could neutralize the turrets. If they failed, Luka and his platoon would be forced to engage under severe disadvantageous conditions. According to the strategic simulator's calculations, the estimated time required to disable the turrets was 1 minute after entry. If the Myrmidon units failed to complete the task, the suppression forces would have no choice but to march in and suffer the consequences. Moments later, an announcement echoed across the battlefield, confirming that the turrets had been neutralized and ordering all units to proceed to the next stage of the operation. The battlefield was a cruel and dangerous place, yet it was also where men found exhilaration in the rush of combat. Luka understood that feeling all too well. He took pleasure in the chaos, in the surge of adrenaline that came with war. He knew himself to be a man who derived both accomplishment and joy from this wicked arena, and if not for that, he would have lost his mind long ago. Now, it was time to put his capabilities to the test. The plan called for infantry to advance from all directions simultaneously, ensuring the rebels had no path of escape. The subterranean tunnels of the arcane fortress were a labyrinth, stretching several hundred meters deep even in the mapped areas. While they possessed a layout from previous expeditions, the rebels had modified the interior, making its accuracy uncertain. Luka informed his platoon that the rebels had likely narrowed the entrances to the underground facilities to prevent Myrmidon from entering. After surveying the area, he declared that he would lead from that point onward. Sergeant Kodrak cautioned Luka, stating that it was a dangerous decision in such a place, where the chances of traps or an ambush were extremely high. In response, Luka asked whether the sergeant was afraid of facing the consequences if he were to die. Kodrak admitted that he was, to which Luka sternly replied that he did not care what happened after his death. Whether Kodrak's pay was reduced or not was of no concern to him. Without hesitation, Luka dashed forward, reaffirming that he would lead and ordering the others to follow. Luka felt a chill run up his spine, as if the men behind him were ready to gun him down. However, he had no time to dwell on such thoughts. His only focus was reaching Lillian Ramones and eliminating her before Eli could get there. He assumed Eli was already in the tunnels, having entered from a different point. If Eli was willing to expend his troops to push forward, he would break through in no time. Luka could do the same by sacrificing his own men, but he refused to let personal emotions cost the lives of loyal soldiers. Instead, he resolved to bear all the risks himself. Sergeant Kodrak shouted Luka's name upon spotting a gun aimed above the commander's head. But before the shot could be fired, Luka instantly destroyed it with his sword. Utilizing the Archi's combat method, he had pushed all his senses to their absolute limit: sight, hearing, touch, smell, and even taste. By detecting chemical traces in the air with his tongue, he gathered an immense amount of information. He could feel his arteries expanding as his heart pounded louder, pumping blood at an accelerated rate. The relentless flow of glucose fueled his brain, while the mounting pressure pushed him beyond his limits. Luka grew increasingly frustrated with how slow his men were. He felt an urge to punch Kodrak in the face. He had understood it in theory, but now he could feel it firsthand. Prolonged use of Archi's victima gradually damaged the brain. Reaching a closed door, Luka kicked it with full force, shattering it. The door flew forward, slamming into one of the guards. The remaining three immediately opened fire, but Luka deflected the bullets with his sword, cutting through the air with precision. Without hesitation, he dashed toward them, eliminating them one by one in a blur of motion. Moments later, Sergeant Kodrak and the rest of the troops arrived at the scene, their expressions tense and uneasy. Luka turned to Kodrak and demanded to know what he was waiting for. Without giving him a chance to respond, he ordered the unit to move forward and warned them to keep up.
As they advance, a group of enemies opens fire, forcing them to take cover momentarily. Luka had not expected such a spacious underground area and assumed that their enemies must have established their defensive lines there. Now deep inside, Luka believed there would be no issue catching up to the evacuating nobles. Using a drone to scout the area, Luka discovered that the enemy's defensive line comprised approximately 100 troops. Behind them, non-military personnel appeared to be retreating. Sergeant Kodrak pointed out that their squad was moving forward too quickly compared to the other guards and questioned why they were not waiting for reinforcements. A logical suggestion: Luka's mind was overloaded from using the Archi's combat method as well. Taking a deep breath, Luka forced himself to relax and carefully observe the situation. That was when he noticed something. The gunfire was not directed at them. Realizing that a commotion had broken out in the rear, Luka deduced that another squad must have arrived around the same time. Seizing the opportunity while the enemy was distracted, he ordered his platoon to advance. As they moved in, the enemy opened fire, while Luka's platoon focused on defense. A warning came in: their shields would not hold for long. However, Luka instructed them to hold their ground. What he needed to be most cautious of was a weapon capable of killing him in a single shot. The enemy had about 8 high firepower weapons, and Luka planned to strike at the precise moment when more than half of them were reloading. Moments later, Luka dashed forward, instructing his troops to spread out and take cover when the enemy focused their attacks on him. He ignored the handguns and rifles, knowing that light weaponry could not penetrate his reinforced limbs. His priority was eliminating the weapons that posed a real threat. Luka also realized that by closing the distance and getting between the enemy forces, he could disrupt their ability to fire freely. With swift, precise movements, he wielded his sword, effortlessly disabling the enemies in his path. Some were eliminated, while others, realizing their defeat, surrendered. Without hesitation, Luka ordered Kodrak to restrain the captured rebels. As Luka advanced, he was shocked to find the lifeless bodies of Eli's platoon scattered before him. These men had been tasked with attacking from the rear, yet Eli had pressed forward, sacrificing them without giving them time to regroup. A troubling thought crossed Luka's mind: Was Eli truly so desperate that he was willing to throw away the lives of his own men? Then, the realization struck him. Eli had done this for Lillian Ramones. Conflicted, Luka wanted to help Eli, but he was still a soldier of the Empire. Choosing one meant betraying the other, and this dilemma filled him with rage. In the end, Luka made his decision. If he encountered Lillian, he would kill her on the spot. He did not care if Eli ended up hating him. If eliminating Lillian meant sparing Eli from becoming a traitor, then so be it. Luka ordered Kodrak to continue arresting more enemies until another platoon arrived. Once they regrouped, the decision would be in Kodrak's hands. Kodrak then turned to Luka and acknowledged his excellence as a soldier, stating that his combat performance today was not just incredible, it was shocking. However, he pointed out a major flaw in Luka's leadership. Luka, unfazed, asked what the issue was. Kodrak explained that despite Luka's overwhelming strength, he had never truly led his men. Instead, he had broken through every obstacle using his own capabilities alone. Relying on such methods, Kodrak added, did not make him a good commander. Irritated, Luka countered that he had no choice. His subordinates were too weak to follow his commands properly, let alone fight at his level. He claimed they would never understand his methods, and if they did, they would only complain that he had not made use of them. Lowering his gaze, Kodrak stated that a day would come when Luka would need the help of those weaker than him, as no one could remain the strongest forever. Luka dismissed the warning, telling Kodrak that he was free to jeer at him when that day arrived, saying, "See, I was right." However, Luka acknowledged that he would keep Kodrak's advice in mind. If he ever came to realize that his approach was flawed, he would remember these words when re-evaluating his strategy. Hearing this, Kodrak was struck by an unexpected realization. He had never known such overwhelming ego could coexist with an openness to change. Scorched walls and scattered shell casings. The lifeless bodies of nobles lay where they fell, their delicate hands clutching weapons they had barely known how to wield, sacrificing themselves to buy time. No doubt, similar scenes were unfolding in the other corridors. The bulk of the suppression forces had already entered, steadily wiping out the remaining rebels. Luka admitted one thing to himself. It felt a bit corny to say it out loud, but Eli was more than just a trusted comrade in battle, he was a friend. The first person his age with whom he could exchange deep thoughts as an equal. Yet now, Eli was sacrificing Imperial soldiers for his own personal motives. To Luka, those men should not have died. A standard platoon would never have risked their troops so recklessly just to pursue fleeing rebels. Even if Eli managed to reach Lillian, how did he plan to get her out? In the end, she would die. Luka understood. She was the woman Eli loved. But what he could not accept was the thought of Eli dying with her. Suddenly, Luka encountered a member of the Ramones family who wished to surrender. However, Luka made it clear that he did not care whether the man surrendered or not. Instead, he demanded to know where Lillian Ramones had gone. The man hesitated before answering that he had no idea which direction Lillian had taken. Luka immediately noticed the subtle flicker in the man's iris as his gaze shifted to the side, a telltale sign of a lie. Without hesitation, Luka grabbed the man's face and crushed down, injuring his eye. He gave him one final chance. Which way did Lillian Ramones run? Writhing in pain, the man finally confessed. Lillian had probably gone downward, though the exact details had not been shared with indirect family members like him. Luka then asked if he had seen Eli Karthika. The man confirmed that he had, and that Eli was the one who had put him in this condition. He continued speaking, attempting to explain what Eli had done to him, but Luka abruptly ended his life. There was no hesitation. The man would have been executed anyway, and Luka figured this was a kinder fate than the torture that awaited him. He rarely felt guilt over killing, but today, there was no satisfaction, just a dull numbness. So this is what the battlefield does to you, he thought. Gunfire and screams grew closer. Luka exhaled, his grip tightening around his weapon. Eli, he questioned in his mind. If you cross the road of no return, what should I do then? Luka always felt paranoid when spending time with Eli, constantly questioning himself. What would he do if Eli turned against the Empire? He had avoided answering that question for as long as possible, but he could no longer ignore it. Now, he had to confront the truth. As Luka stepped into the room, he was met with the sight of lifeless bodies strewn across the entrance. His gaze shifted to Eli, who stood at the center of the table. Turning to face him, Eli acknowledged his arrival. Staring at the carnage, Luka finally spoke. Eli had truly done it. He had led his men to their deaths for his own selfish ambitions. Before them stood Vigo Ramones, the head of the Ramones family, along with his immediate family members, including Lillian. The moment Luka laid eyes on her, a surge of madness overtook him. Furious, he lashed out at Eli, all because of that one damned woman. Eli unsheathed his sword, his expression unreadable. He knew Luka could never overlook this massacre. With a calm but firm voice, he told Luka to draw his weapon. Luka complied, brandishing his sword. "I'm going to knock some sense into you," he declared. He had no choice, he had to fight Eli. Theoretically, victory was his as long as he avoided any major mistakes. But real combat was unpredictable, filled with unseen dangers. Luka knew he couldn't take Eli down quickly. Eli would stall him, buying enough time for the Ramones family to escape. That didn't matter. Luka had already made his decision. He would simply kill them first. Even if slaughtering Lillian meant Eli would despise him with every fiber of his being, at least it would mean he wouldn't have to stain his hands with Eli's blood. But before he could act, Eli suddenly spoke, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Are you going for Lillian?" Luka didn't hesitate. Without a word, he lunged toward her. Eli moved to intercept him. A single firearm was useless against them. Their advanced trajectory prediction forced the shooter to aim with the sole intent of slowing an opponent down rather than landing a lethal hit. However, before setting out on today's mission, Luka had forcibly expanded the speed and frequency ranges of his cybernetic signals. Eli's sloppy shooting wouldn't be enough to stop him, not now. Two Ramones guards moved to intercept Luka, but Eli shouted at them, warning them to stay back. They hesitated for a moment. But it didn't matter. Luka cut them down with ease. "Wait," Vigo Ramones pleaded. Luka didn't stop. Without hesitation, he eliminated Vigo, then turned to his next target, Vigo's wife. Now, only Lillian Ramones remained. Luka had plenty of time to finish her, even though Eli would inevitably restrain him soon. Lillian Ramones, the woman who once approached him with affection. Luka knew he wouldn't be able to erase her from his memory until he purged the guilt of killing her from his soul. Without hesitation, he leapt toward her, determined to make her death swift and painless. It was the only mercy he could offer. But just as he was about to strike, he noticed something strange. Lillian was laughing. Tears streamed down her face, yet she smiled, an unsettling mixture of sorrow and mirth. Before Luka could react, Eli reached him, grabbing hold and pulling him away from her. As Eli and Luka crossed swords, Luka questioned whether Eli had seen Lillian's expression, how she found it hilarious that her family had died. Eli replied that it was not surprising. Lillian had finally been freed from a family that had treated her as nothing more than a tool for arranged marriages. In response, Luka struck Eli's body with his knee and demanded to know what he was talking about. Rising to his feet, Luka told Eli to stop being so defensive, insisting that Lillian was nothing more than another traitor in the end. Eli, unfazed, retorted that Luka knew nothing. He explained that the families labeled as traitors had never actually rebelled against the Empire. Their supposed betrayal was merely an excuse for the Empire to wipe them out. He pointed out how flimsy their defenses had been, far too weak for those allegedly plotting treason. If they had truly intended to rise against the Empire, they would have sought the aid of Cora or Balato rather than relying solely on their own troops. Hearing those words made Luka realize that Eli was not wrong. Gaining entry into the arcane fortress had been difficult, but everything afterward had gone surprisingly smoothly. Considering that three noble families had supposedly plotted treason together, their forces had been far too small. If they had truly been planning a rebellion, there was no reason they wouldn't have sought the assistance of Cora or Balato, both of whom would have welcomed any opportunity to sow division within the Empire. But even if that was true, Luka didn't care. What difference did it make to them? At this rate, Eli was going to end up dying alongside Lillian Ramones. Just then, Lillian spoke, stating that her father was not innocent. He had hidden the fact that he had discovered an arcane relic. Eli tried to stop her, saying this was not the time, but Lillian continued. She revealed that the true reason the Empire had come after their family was because of that very relic. It was thanks to it that they had been able to activate the ancient fortress. Luka demanded to know why Lillian was bringing this up now. Lillian responded that it wasn't as if Luka had spared her out of guilt, but rather because he had been afraid of Eli hating him for it. She added that Luka must already realize that his friend, Eli, could never live the life he wanted within the Empire. However, there was a choice that could benefit all three of them. Raising the arcane relic in her hand, Lillian revealed that with it, they could activate the teleportation device hidden within the underground fortress. She then urged Luka to help them break free from the Empire's control. Luka's face froze in shock. He was unable to respond for a moment. Lillian told Luka about a teleportation device hidden in the tunnels, speculating that it was likely an escape route in case the fortress fell. She then stated that if he believed she was lying, he was free to kill her. But if they could activate the device using the arcane relic, she and Eli would finally have a chance to escape the Empire. Luka, unconvinced, questioned whether she truly thought the Empire would have left such a device intact. Lillian explained that only the direct lineage of the Ramones family knew about the route. If they could reach the deepest part of the underground tunnels, they would be safe. Luka hesitated. He didn't care whether Lillian lived or died, but he needed to consider what was best for Eli. Eli had always wanted to leave the Empire, and Luka was certain that his reckless ideals would eventually get him executed. But here, on the battlefield, it would be easy to claim that Eli had died, or simply vanished. Eli started to speak, but Luka cut him off, ordering him to shut up. He then demanded a promise. If the teleportation device Lillian mentioned didn't exist or failed to work, Eli must not stand in his way. Even Lillian, after all, wouldn't want him getting into trouble. Eli could only look at Lillian, and she met his gaze in silence. Finally, he gave Luka his word. With that, the three of them pressed forward into the underground tunnels, searching for the teleportation device. Luka couldn't shake the thought that he had truly lost it. Not only was he letting Eli go, but he was also protecting Lillian Ramones. If any soldiers caught sight of them, they were as good as dead. Suddenly, Lillian told Luka to wait. She reached out and wiped the blood from Eli's face before it could dry. Watching them, Luka scoffed. "If you two actually make it out alive, you should just get married or something," he muttered. Lillian lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, Eli, I didn't think things would turn out like this." Eli shook his head. "It's all right. You're the one who taught me about the world beyond the Empire. Because of you, I finally understand the source of my frustration." He paused, then added, "If it weren't for you, I would have gone crazy a long time ago. You made me realize, I'm not weird, just different." Lillian was a woman who had fostered Eli's dissenting ideals. These dangerous thoughts spread like a disease, threatening to consume the Empire from within. If left unchecked, they would lead to its downfall. Alternatively, Bellotto or Cora might strike first, sealing their own fate in the process. Luka did not wish for the Empire's collapse. If necessary, he would eliminate potential threats with his own hands, even if that threat was Eli. In his mind, he reaffirmed that he was not a dissident. Upon entering another room, Luka stated that they could take a brief respite. Lillian explained that the path they had taken was known only to them, making it difficult for anyone to track them. It was like a maze. Her father, despite having received permission to study the ruins, had never reported any findings. His ambitions had far exceeded his abilities when he discovered how to activate the fortress, but in the end, everything remained in the Emperor's hands. More importantly, Luka questioned Lillian about how much farther they needed to go. She responded that their destination was coming up soon, just ahead in the corridor. She then thanked Luka for helping her and Eli. Luka dismissed it, stating that he was merely repaying a debt to Eli. The next time they met, he warned, she would be dead. Despite this, he told Eli to stay safe. Lillian then shared her plan. If they managed to escape, she would head to Border City. She advised them to regroup there if they were forced to split up. She also asked Luka if he wanted to leave the Empire as well, but he flatly refused, stating that he had no interest. Eli made a mental note of Border City, while Luka, feeling exhausted, held his head. He wondered if choosing to help Eli had been a mistake made in the heat of the moment, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it now. He needed to figure out how to report the incident once everything was over. The good news was that the chief centurion held him in high regard, which meant he could continue spying on Quinuan without suspicion. Eli was just a trainee, and Lillian, a noble. Neither of them were particularly special. Luca reasoned that the chief centurion wouldn't ask too many questions. Upon arriving at their destination, Luca advised Eli to prepare himself. If the device wasn't there, it was over. With a serious expression, Eli steeled himself while Luca pressed the button to open the door. The moment he did, an uneasy feeling gripped him. He couldn't place its source, but he knew he had to figure it out immediately. One thing was certain: the cause lay beyond this door. The brightness inside wasn't unusual. The fortress's activation had illuminated all the lights. Luca blocked out his other senses, focusing solely on scent. The first thing he detected was fresh blood. Then came the sharp tang of oil and iron. He inhaled deeply, searching for any trace of human presence, but there was none. That could only mean one thing. It was over. Luca knew that even facing a single unarmed Imperial Guard was a risk, but now, he sensed 4 fully armored ones. The worst-case scenario would be if they chose to capture Lillian alive. Unlike Luca or Eli, she had no training. Under torture, she would break, revealing everything. If that happened, the higher-ups would uncover their rebellion. Luca had thought he could get them out, that he could help Eli live the life he longed for, but in the end, it was just a fleeting fantasy. Luca believes there is only one way out. Liliana must die by his own hands, and it must happen immediately. The guards may have their suspicions, but Luca is confident he can offer an excuse that the higher-ups will accept. However, he wonders if Eli will be able to remain composed after witnessing Liliana's death. If Eli lashes out at the Imperial Guard, they will be completely doomed. The Imperial Guards have already turned their attention to them, and time is slipping away. The longer Luca hesitates, the more their suspicions will grow. It is now or never. Suddenly, a bullet pierces the back of Liliana's head, killing her instantly. It was Eli who pulled the trigger. One of the Imperial Guards turns to Luca and Eli, demanding to know why Eli fired. Without hesitation, Eli responds that he executed a hostage they no longer had any use for. The guard questions why they brought a rebel all this way and orders Eli to report everything that has happened so far. Only then will they decide what comes next. Eli simply nods and responds with a curt, "Understood." As the Imperial Guards slowly walk past Luca, he remains frozen in shock, still trying to process what Eli has just done.
At the Chief Centurion's office, Hylas commended Luca for his outstanding performance as the 21st platoon leader. He shared that Kodrak highly praised Luca's combat skills, calling them the best he had ever encountered in a platoon leader. However, Kodrak also noted Luca's weakness in building trust with his subordinates. Hylas advised him to improve in this area by learning from Quinuan. He then brought up a report stating that Luca had waited until Lillian Ramones led him to the deepest part of the tunnels before executing her. Questioning Luca's choice of guide, Hylas asked if there was a specific reason he selected her. Luca explained that he and Eli had planned to prevent the rebels' escape by securing the teleportation device. They believed Lillian Ramones was the ideal hostage due to her weak combat abilities. Hylas found Luca's explanation logical but added that he had one more question. Before he could ask, Luca preemptively inquired if it was about his relationship with Lillian. Hylas clarified that it wasn't just Luca. Eli also had a strong connection to Lillian Ramones. Hiding his trembling hands behind his back, Luca explained that neither he nor Eli would be reckless enough to jeopardize the mission over personal ties. He admitted that he genuinely wanted to give Lillian a sliver of hope, that she might survive if she assisted them. It was the least they could offer her. As he awaited Hylas's response, Luca silently hoped his explanation would suffice. Hylas smiled, accepted his reasoning, and remarked that Luca must be exhausted, choosing to end the conversation there. Just as Luca turned to leave, Hylas called him back. Luca's eyes widened as Hylas questioned how the Ramones family had managed to wipe out Eli's platoon so efficiently. He remarked that their exceptional abilities were surprising. However, Luca found nothing unusual about it. His report had already detailed that Eli's platoon was ambushed while pursuing the rebels. This made him wonder about Hylas's true intentions. Was he testing him? A cold sweat threatened to break out, but Luca maintained his composure. Turning to Hylas, he confidently stated that if he had been in Eli's position, he would have prevented his platoon's annihilation. He added that he firmly believed he would claim the top position among their ranks. Hylas smiled and replied that he expected great things from him. As Luca traveled to the capital, he fell asleep like a log. It was only natural, he had gone days without rest. Memories of everything he had endured flooded his mind.
Eli, Lillian, the arcane fortress, the relic, the teleportation device, and the border city, the place Lillian had longed to reach. In the end, she never made it out of the Empire. She died at the hands of Eli, the very person she must have seen as her knight in shining armor. At that moment, Luka couldn't even look Eli in the eyes. He knew Eli only killed Lillian because he was there. Otherwise, Eli would have chosen to die alongside her. Luka silently apologized to them both. But in the end, he had achieved his goal. He had saved Eli. And for him, that was enough. After returning to the capital, Akbaran, the group rested. Medals of honor were awarded based on merit, but among all the Imperial Guard cadets, only Eli and Luka received such a prestigious distinction. Eli remarked to Luka that it was ironic for him to receive such an honor. Luka, in turn, admitted he never expected Eli to kill Lillian. He had assumed Eli would recklessly attack the Imperial Guard despite having no chance. Eli confessed that he likely would have, had Luka not been there. He also mentioned that his family was pleased with his achievement, despite their past close ties with the Ramones. Luka then urged Eli to quit, insisting that soldiering did not suit him. He pointed out that Eli had killed his own men to protect personal attachments. Eli admitted he would leave if he could, but his family was determined to make him an Imperial Guard at any cost. He added that it might have been better if he had been killed instead, but before he could finish, Luka struck him in the stomach, silencing him with a warning to watch his words. Eli admitted he had never been angrier at himself, lamenting that if only he had been stronger. Luka, however, told him that nothing would have changed. In frustration, Eli slammed his hand against the ground and asked Luka what he had truly done. Luka remained silent, convinced that Eli was not a cold-blooded murderer. He recognized the guilt Eli carried for killing his own subordinates, yet despite everything, he had still failed to save Lillian. To Luka, there was no doubt Eli was doomed, whether by his own mind or by fate. He concluded that Eli did not belong in the Empire. Eli then mentioned that he planned to take leave and return home for a while. After 4 years of service, they should be allowed a few months of rest. While they rode the elevator, Luka suddenly asked why Lillian had laughed while watching her family die. Eli explained that Lillian had been subjected to a cruel fate. Her family had arranged for her to marry a man 30 years her senior. At the time of her birth, this man had promised an immense sum of money on one condition: that Lillian be raised to resemble his deceased wife in every possible way. Her appearance, preferences, habits, even her name, were dictated by this demand, leaving her with no agency over her own identity. It must have been unbearable, Eli added, which also explained why she was so knowledgeable about Bellotto. Luka, horrified, realized that Lillian had been a victim of lifelong abuse. Eli agreed, adding that the only person who ever showed her true kindness was Claude. At that moment, Luka recalled that Claude had once tried to set him up with Lillian. But Eli laughed, revealing that it was actually Lillian and himself who had orchestrated the setup. He then explained that when he told Claude that Luka was the chief centurion's secret bastard child, Claude had taken the bait. Luka, irritated, questioned whether Claude had truly believed such a claim. Eli explained that everyone had seen how the chief centurion treated Luka with unusual favor, which made the rumor plausible. It also provided an explanation for how someone from a low-ranking orphanage had managed to become an Imperial Guard trainee. After all, the captain himself was from the esteemed Custoria family. Eli then revealed that Claude believed Lillian could gain her freedom if she bore Luka's child. Despite being Luka's friend, Eli was not a man of integrity. He would lie, deceive, and even kill if necessary. He had slain his own subordinates and misled Luka without hesitation. And yet, as ironic as it was, Luka still trusted him with his life. Even after everything Eli had done, Luka found himself unable to truly despise him. At Quinuan's residence, Quinuan was pleased to see the returning war hero. Luka, who had been ordered to keep an eye on Quinuan, visited him regularly. Quinuan was well aware that Luka was following the chief centurion's instructions, yet Luka couldn't say he disliked the time he spent with him. During their conversation, Luka mentioned that he had heard Quinuan was skilled at managing subordinates. Quinuan, having reviewed Luka's combat records, offered to share some advice. He then asked if Luka's men had been disobeying orders. Luka clarified that his soldiers were disciplined and willing to charge into battle, even under the command of an unfamiliar leader. Quinuan remarked that this suggested Luka was too soft. Rather than utilizing his men effectively, Luka chose to take unnecessary risks upon himself. Luka argued that by doing so, he ensured that his soldiers remained at full strength. However, Quinuan disagreed. He pointed out that the more Luka fought on the front lines, the more he exhausted himself, which in turn clouded his judgment, the most crucial trait of a commander. In trying to protect his men, Luka had recklessly depleted a resource that should have been preserved, himself. When Luka asked if Quinuan was suggesting he sacrifice his soldiers instead, Quinuan clarified that it wasn't about sending them to die. Instead, Luka needed to make them willingly embrace that possibility. Quinuan asked if Luka remembered Gilda and Gabriel from the lower floors, one whom Luka had saved from gangs and the other whose medical expenses he had covered. Both would gladly assist Luka, as he had done something significant for them. However, Quinuan pointed out that mere gratitude wasn't enough. If Luka wanted them to be willing to lay down their lives for him, he needed to build a deeper bond with them. At the same time, Quinuan warned that Luka must also distance himself emotionally. If he grew too attached, he would hesitate when the time came to expend them. Luka admitted that it wasn't something he wanted to do. Quinuan, amused, remarked that it was one of the things he liked about Luka. He then explained his philosophy in simple terms: be loved, but do not love them back. That, he claimed, was the key to maintaining an advantage in all human relationships. Luka, troubled, questioned what would happen if his mind couldn't handle sacrificing others, if guilt or conscience weighed too heavily on him. Quinuan's response was blunt. He needed to get used to it. Without that ability, Luka would never be able to stand above others. Hearing this, Luka stood up, turned his back on Quinuan, and dryly stated that he would try to be more proactive in sacrificing his men next time. The next day, Luka gathered his belongings and waited for his ride. Before that, Hylas had informed him that he was to attend Krathia Academy, which took him by surprise. He had assumed he would be exempt. Hylas explained that it was tradition to send their best candidates first. He also mentioned that Eli had refused, choosing instead to extend his time off at home. Additionally, Hylas pointed out that Luka had never truly experienced noble society, which was unacceptable if he intended to integrate into the Custoria family. Accepting the decision, Luka replied that if that was Hylas's wish, he would be more than happy to go. Hylas then informed Luka that a guide had been assigned to him. As the meeting time approached, the vehicle arrived. The door opened, and a woman inside looked at Luka before questioning what he was waiting for. Without hesitation, she told him to get in. Luka entered the vehicle and introduced himself, but the girl dismissed him, stating that she already knew who he was and that introductions were unnecessary. Noting her aggressive and arrogant demeanor, Luka also observed that her body was not fully mechanized, leading him to suspect she might be a noble around his age. He then asked how long it would take to reach Krathia Academy and whether she was truly the guide sent by the chief centurion. With a smug expression, the girl retorted, questioning why it mattered to him. Luka smirked, his hand trembling with the urge to punch her, but he remained composed and addressed her as a member of the Custoria family. Startled, the girl demanded to know how he had figured it out. Luka explained that his deduction was simple. Few would dare to openly defy the orders of Hylas Custoria, the chief centurion. Given her attitude and confidence, it was likely that this woman was his daughter. Sending her as his guide was probably the chief centurion's way of proving his sincerity in adopting Luka into the Custoria family. The thought of being called Luka Custoria made Luka smile. It had a nice ring to it. As he suspected, the girl confirmed that she had been sent by her father. Introducing herself as Jiselle Custoria, she warned Luka never to assume he had her figured out again, as it irritated her. In Luka's mind, Lillian Ramones seemed like a saint in comparison. He started to apologize but then questioned why he should bother. He hadn't endured everything just to grovel before some noble. In fact, he had accepted this mission to the academy precisely to escape that kind of life. Realizing this, Luka coldly stated that he would rather die than bow to someone who despised him. He suggested they simply follow their orders. Jiselle would guide him, and he would follow. Her expression shifted from frustration to calm silence, and she chose not to respond. Luka could only sigh, already certain that this was going to be a pain in the ass. Upon arriving at their destination, Jiselle led Luka to the dormitory where he would be staying. On the way, Luka noticed a statue of Emperor Dino Krathia, the father of the nation and the guardian of humanity. Now, at last, he set foot on Krathia Academy, a place he had seen countless times in the media. As they walked, students began to stare at them. Jiselle explained that the Academy's student identification color was violet with low saturation. Continuing down the path, Luca witnessed a noble student shoving a commoner aside for merely being in his way. What a waste of an excellent implant, Luca thought to himself. Suddenly, Jiselle questioned what he was waiting for, then scoffed at his attire, asking if he didn't even own appropriately colored clothing. Luca simply replied that trainees had no need for such things. He smiled to himself. Seeing Jiselle so flustered over something as trivial as clothing was not what he had expected from his first impression of her. As Luca apologized while speaking to Jiselle, a young man named Felix noticed them and called out to him. Approaching with a friendly demeanor, Felix greeted Luca and mentioned that he had heard Eli wouldn't be coming, so he assumed Luca would skip out as well. Turning to Jiselle, Felix noted that they had met before, then introduced himself as an Imperial Guard trainee, just like Luca. He politely asked if Jiselle would give them a moment to talk. Lowering his voice, Felix whispered to Luca, remarking on how surprising it was to see the Lady of Custoria by his side. He mused that the rumors about the chief centurion holding Luca in high regard must be true. Luca scoffed, replying that he could hardly believe someone as insufferable as Jiselle was the chief's daughter. She had been disrespecting him from the start, and he had been sorely tempted to smash her nose in. Felix remarked that the chief centurion likely wanted Luca to experience noble society in preparation for his future, or perhaps he even intended to take Luca in as a son-in-law by marrying him to Jiselle. Luca dismissed the idea as nonsense. Given his own personality and Giselle's temperament, he wouldn't be surprised if such a marriage fell apart immediately. Besides, he and the chief had already made a deal. In exchange for keeping watch over Quinuan, Luca would be adopted into the Custoria family. There was no need for marriage. He would become the chief's son either way. Still, he couldn't entirely fault Felix's speculation. Felix then asked if Luca had undergone any modifications, to which Luca replied that he hadn't, at least not yet. In response, Felix handed him something useful. Luca stared at the item in his hand, his expression blank with curiosity. As he slowly walked away, Felix casually remarked that trainees visiting the academy had always been popular with the ladies. Felix provided Luca with essential information about life at the academy. Luca had a feeling that by the time this mission was over, they would become good friends. One of the key things Felix explained was the dormitory system. In short, it housed talented students from the lower sectors, like Luca, as well as members of declining noble families who couldn't afford private housing. Even within the academy, the class hierarchy remained firmly in place. However, Luca didn't mind. If rising through the ranks were too easy, it wouldn't be any fun. He was eager to see how things would unfold. Luca arrived at his room with the assistance of a robot, astonished to find it resembling a lavish palace. He found it hard to believe that such accommodations were meant for commoners and lesser nobles. It was no surprise that the academy was considered the best, as it housed the talented individuals deemed unfit for military service. The reality was far from his initial expectations. Before entering the dormitory, Jiselle informed him that once classes ended, the head of the dormitory would escort him to his room. She also provided her personal contact in case of emergencies. Luca acknowledged that Jiselle seemed to take her responsibilities seriously and was not just a spoiled aristocrat, or so he assumed. Dismissing the need for her number, he stated he would not use it, to which Jiselle replied that the sentiment was mutual. Before parting, she offered a final piece of advice. Luca should avoid getting too close to the head of the dormitory. When he inquired why, she simply warned that the head was the most deranged individual in the entire academy. Moments later, the doorbell to Luca's room rang. When he opened the door, he was met with the sight of a girl with long, curly orange hair. She introduced herself as Barbara, the head of the dormitory, and Luca returned the introduction. Barbara explained that she had come as quickly as possible after her classes and asked if he had been waiting long. As Luca observed her, he noticed the worn-out cuffs of her old clothes and the absence of a last name, clear signs of lower-class status. This made him question Giselle's warning about Barbara being the most deranged person in the academy. She didn't seem that way to him. Perhaps, he reasoned, Jiselle simply harbored prejudice against those from the lower sectors. Luca assured Barbara that he had just arrived and told her to call him by his name, mentioning that he was also from the lower sectors. Barbara was surprised, impressed that someone from the lower sectors had become an Imperial Guard trainee. Luca, in turn, pointed out that the same could be said for her, as becoming the head of the dormitory was no small feat. Seeing Barbara smile and laugh, Luka imagined that she must have overcome significant challenges to reach her position, just as he had. After their introductions, Barbara invited him to follow her, explaining that it was her duty to give him a rundown of the dormitory. As Luka observed her, he noticed that she had just showered despite her classes having recently ended. He wondered if she had been pressed for time, or if she was simply someone who managed her time with extreme efficiency. At the academy's main building, Jiselle noted that Luka was properly dressed this time, just as she had instructed before. She then invited him to head to the classroom, explaining that his father had ordered her to attend classes with him for a week. Just as they were about to leave, a voice called out to Jiselle. It was Barbara. She greeted Jiselle, mentioning that it had been a while since they last spoke. However, Jiselle, clearly irritated, curtly told Barbara to get lost. Barbara calmly explained that she only wanted to say hello, but Jiselle stepped closer with an annoyed expression. In a sharp tone, she sarcastically greeted Barbara before repeating that she had nothing else to say to her and dismissing her again. Without another glance, Jiselle turned away and urged Luka to hurry, reminding him that he shouldn't be late for his first class. Luka observed Barbara's closed-off posture, just like the other so-called losers from the lower sectors. He wondered how she had managed to become dorm head with that kind of attitude. In the end, he decided he wasn't a fan. As they walked, Luka casually mentioned that Jiselle seemed to know Barbara well. Jiselle simply replied that Barbara only looked familiar. They had entered the academy around the same time. Luka then noted that she seemed to dislike Barbara, but Jiselle ignored the comment. She had already called Barbara the craziest psychopath in all of Krathia Academy, yet Barbara still clung to her. It was somewhat interesting, but ultimately, it wasn't Luka's concern. What mattered was surviving the next 2 months, then he would become a noble. Gossip wasn't something he needed to waste time on. At least, that was what he told himself. But with a week of tedious classes ahead, he found himself more intrigued by Jiselle and Barbara's relationship. There wasn't much else to entertain him in a place built for pampered nobles. Even Felix had refused to fight him, too embarrassed by the thought of losing. At this rate, Luka feared he was growing rusty. He craved a fight. The thought of war, of wielding himself as a weapon, gnawed at his mind. Maybe it was the chemicals he had been injected with during his training as a trainee. Or maybe it was just who he was, but either way, he wanted to fight. Badly. Suddenly, someone called out to Luka, addressing him as an Imperial Guard trainee. The person remarked that Luka had been clinging to Jiselle all week and demanded to know his relationship with her. Luka responded that he was not obligated to answer and sarcastically asked if the man had feelings for Jiselle. The question flustered the man, his face turning red with embarrassment. Irritated, Luka mockingly asked what he found so appealing about that woman, provoking the man into attempting a punch. However, Luka effortlessly caught his fist and immobilized him. He found it absurd that he was venting his frustration on someone like this. After some conversation, the man realized that Luka had no romantic involvement with Jiselle. Seizing the opportunity, Luka proposed a deal. If the man answered his question, he would tell Jiselle that he was a good person. Luka then asked why Jiselle disliked Barbara. The man explained that it hadn't always been that way. Giselle's resentment stemmed from a curse. When Luka inquired about the source of the curse, the man revealed that it was Barbara herself. He elaborated that anyone close to her inevitably became entangled in incidents where androids malfunctioned. These particular androids, known for their exceptional reliability, inexplicably went haywire whenever she was around. Over time, this phenomenon became known as Barbara's curse. Luka acknowledged that the frequency of these incidents was statistically improbable but argued that it wasn't Barbara's fault. The man, however, found that very fact unsettling. He questioned what kind of person would actively seek out new friends while knowing that anyone who got close to them was at risk. Because of this, people deliberately treated Barbara harshly. That was why she had been made the dormitory head, a position with no benefits and countless responsibilities. Hearing this, Luka realized that Barbara hadn't been chosen for the role due to her abilities. Just then, they spotted Barbara nearby, speaking with a group of girls. Without warning, one of the girls splashed water on her, soaking her clothes. Laughing, she claimed it had slipped from her hands. She then mockingly offered to wash Barbara's clothes and ordered her to strip. Barbara, remaining composed, declined and said she would change in her room instead. The girl sneered and turned to her friends, asking if they had heard Barbara refuse her kindness. Her expression darkened as she spoke in a cold, commanding tone, demanding that Barbara hand over her clothes, promising to return them crisp and clean. Barbara trembled in fear as she hesitantly began to remove her clothes. Observing the situation, Luca finally understood. The same thing must have happened on the day Barbara gave him a tour of the dorms. That was why, despite being short on time, she had still needed to wash up. Luca smirked. Barbara was in luck. He was in a mood where he couldn't control himself. Without hesitation, he threw his knife, striking the girl's bottle and sending it flying. His voice was sharp and unwavering as he told them to cut it out and get lost. The girl scoffed and asked if he even knew what he was doing. But before she could finish, Luca cut her off. His tone was cold and absolute. "I don't care if you're a woman. I'll hit you right in the face." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and the group quickly backed off. Barbara hesitated before calling out to Luca, thanking him softly. Luca smiled, but, in his mind, he wondered, was he now close enough to her to be targeted by malfunctioning androids? Enrico pulled Luca aside and warned him about a woman named Kisha Kano, telling him he had messed with the wrong person. Luca replied that he knew who Kisha was and dismissed the warning, claiming that a powerless family like hers wouldn't pose any threat. Still visibly worried, Enrico explained that the powerless image was just a front. The Kano family actually ran a gang in the lower sectors and might already be investigating Luca's identity. Luca, unfazed, simply said he hoped they would make a move, as he was bored with life anyway. Enrico urged him to be cautious, reminding him that the Kano family was notorious for seeking revenge if Kisha was harmed in any way. He added that they had already started targeting Barbara for that very reason, because Kisha's boyfriend had been cursed by her. Luca nodded and replied that he would keep that in mind. Moments later, Jiselle arrived, her expression clearly irritated. Luca turned to Enrico and teased him, asking why he didn't go say hi to Jiselle, implying that he liked her. Enrico's face turned bright red as he stammered that he was content just admiring her from afar. Before dashing off, he reminded Luca not to forget to put in a good word for him. Jiselle glanced at Luca and remarked that it seemed he had already made a friend. Luca nodded and told her the guy's name, adding that Enrico was nice and kind. However, Jiselle responded bluntly, saying Enrico gave her the creeps, like he was always lurking somewhere nearby. In Luca's thoughts, he felt a pang of sympathy for Enrico, realizing that sometimes, there's no point in taking a shot, even in the dark. In the dean's office, Professor Allburn questioned Luca about whether he had seriously thrown a knife at another student. He acknowledged that the academy might feel suffocating for someone like Luca, but advised him to take things easy. Luca gave a simple nod, indicating that he understood. Professor Allburn went on to explain that since most of the students there weren't trained to fight, Luca was like a wolf thrown into a herd of docile sheep. Luca, however, remarked that the others acted as if they were untouchable, as if they wouldn't get bitten. The professor paused for a moment before replying. While Luca might see these students as harmless sheep, he warned, there were monsters hiding among them, creatures far more terrifying than wolves, disguised in sheep's clothing. He advised Luca that youthful fire was fine, but he should be careful not to cross paths with those hidden monsters. Luca nodded once more and said he would keep that in mind. As he stepped out of the dean's office, a thought lingered in his mind. He wasn't chasing monsters, not really. What he was after was a witch's curse. Luca walked along the path behind the gym, well past dorm curfew. Word had already spread about how he'd saved Barbara. If the rumors held any truth, he figured the curse would soon take effect, sending those androids into a frenzy and turning them against him. But before that could happen, someone appeared. The figure approached and asked if he was Luca. Luca narrowed his eyes, replying with a question of his own. Did they have business with him? One of them stepped forward. Kisha sends her greetings, the stranger said, explaining that the Kano family had a tradition. Greetings served as retribution for past losses. A smirk crossed the man's face as he continued. You're not going to report to your superior that you got beaten by a student, are you? He leaned in slightly. I'll give you one chance. Go to Kisha, get on your knees, and apologize. Unfazed, Luca responded that he would give the man one final chance to walk away with his limbs intact, as he did not believe he could lose to children who had never set foot on a battlefield. The man, insulted and enraged, demanded to know what Luca meant by that. Without hesitation, he charged toward Luca, preparing to land a punch. However, before he could strike, A red light flashed, and an android appeared in front of them, calmly asking if assistance was needed. The man turned to his comrade and scolded him for providing inaccurate information, insisting that he had said there would be no patrols in the area at that time. His comrade defended himself, claiming he was certain androids never came to that location. Pointing a finger at Luka, the man declared that he would spare him for the day, but promised they would settle things another time. He then ordered his comrades to leave, stating that he wasn't foolish enough to start a fight in front of an android. The android continued to ask if they needed assistance, but one of the men snapped back that he did not, telling the android to get lost. The android responded calmly, "That is simply impossible." Without warning, the android advanced toward one of the men and eliminated him swiftly. It then shifted its focus to the leader, but Luka intervened, delivering a powerful kick to the android's head, sending it stumbling backward. Surprised and fearful, the man gasped, muttering that it was Barbara's curse, that the witch's curse was real. Luka merely smiled, replying that a student of Krathia Academy should not put stock in such superstitions. Luka analyzed the situation, noting that the android was using its maximum output, a state that could only last for a few minutes. It must have calculated that to stand a chance against Luka, it needed to expend all of its energy. Luka realized that this android hadn't gone berserk due to a simple malfunction. This was the work of a human. With a smile, Luka felt a surge of excitement, silently wondering if they should warm up a bit. The android launched an attack on Luka, who skillfully evaded each strike with ease. A faint smile played on his lips as he observed the precision of the android's chop, reckless, yet undeniably clean. It even had metal claws, and a direct hit from those would have certainly landed him in the hospital for some time. But for Luka, it was hardly exhilarating. He needed more, something that truly set his dopamine on fire. Something beyond the predictable performance of an ordinary android. He was waiting for it to surpass his expectations, to surprise him. Instead, it proved disappointing. With a sigh, Luka decided to end the fight and swiftly destroyed the android. He then turned to the man who had attempted to punch him earlier and remarked that he had thought the man was eager to fight him to the end. Luka asked why he wasn't taking things seriously now that their warm-up was over. But the man said nothing. He simply turned and fled, leaving Luka staring after him in disappointment. Moments later, multiple ships arrived at the scene to investigate the source of the commotion. Following the incident, the security forces requested Luka's cooperation in their investigation. They were convinced that the individual responsible for controlling the android was within the academy, and they needed Luka's help to track down the suspect. As Luka was leaving the area, Jiselle spotted him and called out his name. She rushed toward him, her voice laced with frustration. She demanded to know if he understood what had happened to her because he had followed his father's orders. She added bitterly that she had warned Barbara not to get involved with him, yet still, she had. Luka calmly replied that he couldn't simply stand by and watch a group of people gang up on a single person. Jiselle narrowed her eyes and asked if he was saying he intended to fight again. Luka shrugged lightly and responded that he supposed he wouldn't have a choice if they forced his hand. With a voice full of intensity, Jiselle declared that she would speak with Kisha Kano and seek an agreement. Luka paused, puzzled by her sudden desire to mediate. Why was Jiselle trying to resolve this herself? But as he considered her words, that Kisha would compromise after a conversation, it became clear. Jiselle was confident in her ability to control Kisha. Realizing that, Luka nodded and agreed to her plan. He told her that he would go ahead and meet with Kisha himself, as he'd prefer not to attract the attention of the chief. Still, in the back of Luka's mind, there was something else, something he wanted to confirm. Kisha explained that Barbara had made a move on her boyfriend first. However, Luka expressed doubt, remarking that Kisha didn't seem like the type to simply let that happen. She then asked if Kisha was certain she hadn't deliberately sent her boyfriend to Barbara. Kisha could only respond with an offended expression, muttering a confused, "What?" Luka went on to question why Kisha's boyfriend disagreed with her when she had threatened to send people to harass him, just as she had previously done with Luka. Luka also asked whether Kisha simply needed an excuse to cause trouble for Barbara. Those words clearly offended Kisha. With a sharp, angry tone, she told Luka to shut up and insisted that she had done nothing wrong. Observing Kisha's reaction, Jiselle stepped in, advising her to calm down. She added that the confrontation had gone far enough and questioned whether Kisha planned to ignore her completely. Jiselle then turned to Luka and requested a moment alone with Kisha. Luka agreed and stepped aside. Just as Luka suspected, Jiselle clearly held the upper hand over Kisha. However, one question remained unanswered. Why hadn't Jiselle simply ordered Kisha to stop the bullying? It would have been far simpler than mediating a confrontation between Luka and Kisha. Moments later, Jiselle emerged and expressed her belief that Luka had no intention of causing trouble. Luka explained that he merely wanted to test his theory, that androids could only be controlled by nobles. In response, Jiselle told him to stop pretending to be a detective, reminding him that plenty of investigators were already working on the case without his interference. Luka replied that he was certain those investigators would have a great time extracting information from nobles, just as Jiselle had managed to silence Kisha without uttering a single command. Jiselle explained that a family name carried great weight in noble society, and that Kisha was simply in no position to ignore her words. Luka then questioned whether that was the reason Jiselle had ordered Kisha to bully Barbara. Jiselle narrowed her eyes and asked what he was trying to imply. Luka responded that someone who hated Barbara just happened to possess the right piece on the board, and had simply used their resources. At that, Jiselle grabbed Luka's shirt and warned him to stop talking while he still could. Her voice sharpened as she asked whether all his mechanical enhancements had tampered with his brain cells. But almost immediately, she released him and muttered an apology, admitting she shouldn't have reacted that way. Turning her back on him, Jiselle began to walk away. As she left, she told Luka he had better be ready to pay the price if he caused another disturbance. In Luka's mind, the conclusion was becoming clearer. Based on the circumstances, Jiselle was the most suspicious. Yet something didn't sit right. He couldn't shake the feeling that, despite her power, Jiselle seemed afraid. The insight granted by the Archie's victima only deepened the mystery. Later, while Luka was seated alone, Barbara quietly approached and sat beside him. She offered him a lunchbox. When he asked about the meaning behind it, Barbara explained that she had prepared the food to thank him for saving her from Kisha. She then asked if it would be all right for her to keep making meals for him while he remained at the academy. However, Luka gently declined, stating that he didn't want to cause any misunderstandings. Barbara, unfazed, responded that she was fine with misunderstandings. That response made Luka wonder, did Barbara truly like him? He then asked why she kept trying to interact with him, despite knowing that the uncontrollable androids would continue to target her. Barbara's answer was simple and uncertain. She just didn't know what else to do. Luka told her that Kisha's harassment had been the result of Jiselle's orders. He explained that Jiselle wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. To his surprise, Barbara calmly replied that she was already aware of that. Curious, Luka asked if she knew why Jiselle hated her. Barbara turned to him with an eerie smile. With a look that sent a chill down his spine, she asked, "Is there any reason why I should tell you that?" Luka observed Barbara carefully, curious to see how she would respond to his provocation. There was something about her that unsettled him, a strange, off-putting feeling he couldn't quite place. In that moment, Professor Gid's words echoed in his mind. The monster he had referred to was none other than Barbara. Professor Gid had confided in Luka that he had met Kisha's boyfriend, more accurately, her ex. Just as Luka had suspected, Kisha had deliberately set him up with Barbara, and he had never truly been given the choice to refuse her orders. The professor had further revealed that Luka was the sixth known case. This time, the situation had escalated, there had even been a death. Frustration laced the professor's voice when he said he wanted nothing more than to chain up the bastard who believed they could get away with such acts. Luka had asked if Professor Gid had discovered anything more about Barbara. The response was cautious. She was from the lower sectors and officially just a student. From a realistic standpoint, it would be nearly impossible for someone in her position to bypass the Academy's firewalls and gain access to the intranet to control the droids. However, the professor noted that the same could not be said for nobles. They possessed the means to interfere during the manufacturing or distribution stages of the androids. There had been cases, documented instances, of corruption where individuals were bought with wealth and power. Professor Gid also revealed one final detail, uncertain of its significance. Barbara was sponsored by the Custoria family. To Luka, it felt as though the puzzle pieces were nearly in place, but not quite. If he could only torture Barbara, everything might become clearer, but instead, he was forced to sift through endless, useless tasks. The noble class still lived with fierce competitiveness. Perhaps it was a way to prove their value to their own families. Eli had once told Luka that useless nobles were treated like imbeciles, left to live in silence, unnoticed and discarded. Luka went to see Jiselle, only to be surprised by a side of her he hadn't expected, a hard-working one. It was a far cry from the insufferable woman he had first met, and he found it strangely impressive. Before Jiselle could take a drink from her tumbler, she glanced at Luka and asked what had brought him there. Luka simply answered that he had come to see her. This response caused Jiselle to spit out the water she was drinking in surprise. Regaining her composure, Jiselle shot Luka a sharp look and told him to get to the point, as she was busy. Luka took a moment to scan their surroundings before he spoke again, his tone serious. From now on, he informed her, she was not to lie or hide the truth from him. He had officially been requested to assist in the investigation. Jiselle, clearly uncomfortable, expressed with reluctance that she hated to say it, but reminded Luka not to forget that she was the daughter of the chief centurion. Luka, undeterred, revealed that he had discovered the Custoria family was sponsoring Barbara. He then questioned Jiselle, asking if that was the reason she wanted to get Barbara out of the academy. Giselle's response was cold. She explained that she felt her hatred for Barbara was justified, especially considering that she was the second victim of the curse. Until that point, they had been friends. Luka, however, countered, suggesting that if Jiselle and Barbara had truly been friends, she would have made an effort to help Barbara with her curse. Jiselle replied that their friendship hadn't been deep enough for her to intervene in such a way. Luka then shared troubling news. The security forces viewed the android's outbursts as incidents stemming from clear ill intent. And as of now, Jiselle was the prime suspect. Anger flashed across Giselle's face as she demanded to know why Luka would suspect her, especially considering she was also a victim of the curse. Luka calmly explained that Jiselle had all the necessary tools to commit the crime, her family's power, her knowledge, and her abilities. Jiselle turned her back to Luka and remarked that he had truly lost his mind. Luka, trying to calm the situation, told her not to worry, as he didn't suspect her. He then urged Jiselle to share anything she might know, suggesting that it was important for him to be informed. Before Luka could continue, however, Barbara appeared, saying she had been looking for him. She explained that she couldn't find him in his usual spot and had become concerned. Luka was taken aback, wondering how Barbara had found him, especially since he hadn't sensed anyone following him. He also questioned how someone who supposedly endured bullying could present such a calm, innocent face, particularly in front of Jiselle, who was allegedly behind it all. In Luka's mind, 10 minutes was all he needed to uncover the truth, but he wasn't allowed even that. A surge of frustration overwhelmed him, and for a moment, he felt an urge to grab Barbara by the neck and slam her against the wall. He snapped at her, his voice intense, telling Barbara to drop the smile because it was beginning to creep him out. With a trembling voice, Barbara asked Luka why he was saying such things. Her hands shook as tears welled in her eyes, and she explained that she liked him because he had saved her from Kisha. If there had been any misunderstanding, she wanted to talk it out. But Luka, without warning, threw a metal object behind her and coldly stated that, up until that moment, he had simply been passing the time. Now, however, he was done playing games. He made it clear that Barbara had taken him for a fool. Barbara, visibly trembling, covered her face with her hands. But after a moment, she removed them, revealing a chilling smile and an unsettling presence. With an eerie calm, she told Luka she had no idea what he was talking about. This version of Barbara sent a wave of fear through Jiselle, leaving her frozen and unable to move as Barbara slowly walked past her. Barbara placed a lunchbox near Luka and told him to enjoy the food later, then turned back to approach Jiselle. She embraced her, whispering softly, "It's nice to see you." With a mocking laugh, Barbara pulled away and walked off, singing as she disappeared from view. Once Barbara was gone, Jiselle sank slowly to the floor, her head bowed in despair. Luka, watching this unfold, felt as though everything had been confirmed, the true culprit and their connection to the innocent. He attempted to speak to Jiselle, but she silenced him, telling him not to ask her anything. With a pleading look, she begged Luka to spend his time quietly until he left the academy, her voice filled with desperation. Since the incident, Jiselle had been avoiding Luka. On that day, he had reported the truth of the situation to the chief centurion. Luka had judged that the matter had escalated beyond his level of authority. However, the chief's response was unexpected. Luka claimed the Imperial Guard would handle the situation swiftly, yet the chief seemed content to merely observe, despite the fact that his own daughter was involved. As a trainee of the Imperial Guard, Luka's duty was to follow the directives of his superiors. He was certain they were orchestrating a larger scheme beyond his understanding. It was clear to him that Barbara was the culprit. However, someone from the lower sectors shouldn't have the capability to control androids. That raised a critical question. How had Barbara managed to do it? If Luka's suspicions were correct, the situation would become far more troublesome. He needed to meet with Jiselle to confirm his theory, but she remained unreachable. Moments later, Enrico approached Luka and asked if he had spoken well of him to Jiselle. Luka simply smiled and replied, "Of course." Luka had used Enrico to lure Jiselle to a secluded location, where he remained hidden, silently observing as Enrico attempted to confess his feelings. However, Jiselle quickly rejected him. With a firm expression and steady voice, she told Enrico that she wasn't interested and that his constant presence made her uncomfortable. She pleaded with him to stop following her. The words shattered Enrico. Tears welled in his eyes, and he ran from the scene without another word. Watching from the shadows, Luka silently apologized to him in his thoughts. Once Enrico was gone, Luka stepped out of hiding. Jiselle's expression immediately shifted to anger. She confronted him, her voice sharp with frustration. She declared that she would no longer tolerate his behavior and threatened to report his actions to her father. Unfazed, Luka calmly replied that it wouldn't make a difference. He had already reported her involvement in the situation. Her eyes widened with worry. "How much did you tell him?" she asked. Luka looked at her coldly. "I have no reason to share that with you," he said. Jiselle turned her back to Luka, a sudden headache washing over her. She trembled with worry. Her reputation, her standing in the family, everything she had worked so hard for until now, vanishing in an instant. Suddenly, she spun around, grabbed Luka by the shirt, and shouted that it was all his fault. If only he had never come, none of this would have happened. Luka tried to reason with her, saying it wasn't too late and urging her to tell him everything she knew so he could help. But Jiselle snapped back, telling him not to feed her any bullshit and demanding to know what a mere trainee could possibly do. She was stunned, however, when Luka revealed that he was about to join the Custoria family. It might be a bit embarrassing for Luka to say it himself, but he's considered a genius, someone who only comes around once every few years. More importantly, the chief centurion holds him in high regard, and if he were to join the Custoria family, his influence wouldn't be insignificant. Luka went on to say that no matter what Jiselle's problems were, he would support her. He added that if he solved this case properly, it would increase his chances of being accepted by the chief centurion. And if he and Jiselle shared the same goal, it would help build trust between them. Jiselle was taken aback. She let out a slow, almost disbelieving laugh, her legs suddenly giving way beneath her. She nearly collapsed, but Luka caught her just in time. Then, with a trembling voice, Jiselle confessed, she was the one who controlled the androids. And she was the one who created Barbara's curse. Luka and Jiselle sat down, the tension between them slowly giving way to something more vulnerable. Jiselle opened up, telling Luka that Barbara had been like her first real friend, someone she could truly trust. She went on to explain that 3 years ago, curiosity got the better of her. She had always wondered about the person their family was sponsoring. That was when she first met Barbara. Jiselle admitted that everything started with jealousy. A boy had begun approaching Barbara, drawn to her cheerful personality and radiant smile. Jiselle didn't want to lose her only friend to some guy. Looking back, she realized how immature she had been. She didn't like the boy, and out of spite, she just wanted to mess with him. So, she built a robot disguised as an android. Jiselle had placed a voice recording inside the robot, ordering it to scare the boy away from Barbara. The robot would follow him at night, chasing him down dark corridors, a prank, she thought, just to keep him away. But that small act spiraled into something far worse than she ever intended. One night, the boy tripped while running from the robot and suffered a severe head injury. The trauma forced him to quit the academy. Overcome with fear, Jiselle discarded the robot, hoping to erase any trace of what she'd done. But someone had been seriously hurt. There was no escaping an investigation. Jiselle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. When the investigation began, it wasn't the authorities who figured it out first, it was Barbara. Somehow, she knew it was Giselle's doing. But instead of turning her in, Barbara offered her a way out. She told Jiselle that if she became a victim herself, no one would suspect her. That's when she volunteered to be the second victim of the so-called curse. Jiselle explained that she had access to android maintenance. Following Barbara's instructions, she implanted a mysterious chip that Barbara had given her into one of the androids. She didn't understand how it worked, but the next thing she knew, the android approached her on its own, and went completely haywire. That incident marked Jiselle as the second victim. And from that moment on, the curse of Barbara was born. But something changed in Barbara after that. She began acting strangely, making increasingly unsettling demands. She told Jiselle to isolate her completely from everyone, and warned that more victims would be needed regularly. That's when Luka pieced it together. Barbara hadn't just helped Jiselle cover her tracks, she had trapped her. She manipulated the situation to escalate it beyond repair, ensuring that Jiselle couldn't back out, and couldn't escape her. Moments later, Jiselle began to hear Barbara accusing her of revealing their secret to a man, calling her a traitor. Luka wondered how Barbara had accessed Giselle's device when it was supposed to have top-level security. His instincts and intuition screamed at him. He needed to get out of there, now. Then he heard it, a sound not coming from Giselle's device. A mechanical noise. Realization hit him. Without thinking, Luka leapt forward, shielding Jiselle from an incoming bullet. He took the hit. Gritting his teeth, he yanked off his jacket and pressed it against the wound to slow the bleeding. It had to be an attack drone. Luka could take it down easily if he moved fast enough. But moving at high speed would make his injury worse. All he had on him was a pocket knife, and no one around seemed to notice what was happening, thanks to the silencer. It pissed him off. But still, even in pain, he wanted to destroy that thing, tear it apart, smash its sensors, and pulverize its damn nose. Multiple bullets were fired toward Luka and Giselle's hiding spot. Luka thought that if only he could pinpoint the drone's exact location. Then, an idea struck him. He turned to the trembling Jiselle and asked if she had a mirror. Luka used the mirror to track the drone while remaining hidden. Once he located it, Luka moved swiftly and threw his pocket knife, striking the drone, which exploded on impact. He immediately returned to his hiding spot. Suddenly, something went wrong with Luka's device, so he asked Jiselle if her comms were working. Jiselle replied that nothing was functioning. Then, unexpectedly, Jiselle heard Barbara's voice on her device, saying she had tried to protect Jiselle and asking why she had betrayed her. Barbara also expressed her love for Luka and said she hoped Jiselle would despise her even more. Luka, however, grabbed Giselle's hand and destroyed the device, cutting off the communication. He told Jiselle that there was no point in listening to a crazy woman's ramblings. Overcome with emotion, Jiselle rested her head on Luka's chest, crying as she whispered, "It hurts." Realizing they needed to get to safety, Luka moved with Jiselle and spotted Felix arriving at the location. Felix told Luka that he had received orders from above but hadn't heard anything about this operation. Luka replied that he hadn't been informed either. Puzzled, Jiselle asked if this was all part of her father's plan, to which Felix confirmed that they had received orders directly from the chief centurion himself. Jiselle couldn't believe it. The thought that her own father would treat her as a disposable pawn was unbearable. In Luka's mind, he understood that Jiselle couldn't easily accept it. The chief centurion's daughter was still considered a civilian, after all. But anyone would be disturbed if their own father saw them as expendable. Luka sympathized with Jiselle, despite her noble status. Noticing Luka's injury, Felix asked if it was serious. Luka responded that it was, and that he might be found dead by morning. Felix smiled, understanding that it meant Luka was still alive for now. He tossed his gun to Luka, knowing that Luka wouldn't be as fast as usual. Felix then reported that he was currently in contact with both Luka and Jiselle when, suddenly, a bullet destroyed his arm. The gunshot rang out from nearby, but Luka still couldn't sense its source. A drone so advanced that even Imperial Guard trainees couldn't detect it. Luka thought that Barbara couldn't possibly have the experience to create something so sophisticated. But then, a voice spoke, demanding that they hand over Jiselle Custoria, explaining that their princess wanted the girl. Moments later, Felix was grabbed by the neck by an invisible force. Luka was shocked to realize who their enemy was, a combat suit capable of completely disguising itself. No wonder they hadn't been able to sense it. Luka quickly told Jiselle that he would buy them some time. When he gave her the signal, she had to run. Jiselle tried to speak, but Luka covered her mouth with his hand, explaining that there was no time to argue and that she needed to follow his instructions. Luka then began counting and motioned for Jiselle to make her escape. While Jiselle ran to escape, Luka opened fire on the intruder, but the intruder effortlessly dodged every bullet. Luka was stunned by the intruder's insane reaction time. The intruder then remarked that it pained him to kill two of his juniors. Suddenly, he appeared behind Luka, who was shocked to realize the intruder was actually their senior. With a swift kick to Luka's back, the intruder warned, "You'll die if you don't get a grip." Luka managed to defend himself and, in that moment, realized the truth: the intruder was a former member of the Imperial Guard. No wonder he was so exceptionally skilled, even for a terrorist. To think that Luka would allow himself to be distracted by his intruder's nonsense when he should have been entirely focused on the battle. The intruder was now aiming directly at Luka, confident that he would have enough time to capture Jiselle after killing him. Luka realized that if he continued to face the intruder head-on, he would undoubtedly die. He knew he had to find another way. Refocusing on the fight, Luka made a swift decision to use Felix's sword. Without even glancing back, he threw aside his gun and reached for the weapon. The intruder was astonished that Luka could strike the sword without looking and asked if he was perhaps a user of the Archi's combat method. He added that it would be a waste to kill someone with such skill. He then admitted that he had originally intended to toy with Luka, but the situation had taken a more serious turn. Urging Luka to step down, he warned him not to throw his life away over mere compulsion. But Luka exhaled slowly, thinking to himself that the intruder was seriously underestimating him. Nothing else mattered to Luka at that moment. What did matter, however, was the seething hatred burning within him for this man. Without hesitation, Luka lunged at the intruder, attempting to strike him with his sword. As the intruder swiftly evaded the attack, he took note of Luka's impressive skill and dedication, especially for someone his age. He questioned aloud whether Luka was truly willing to throw it all away for the Empire, or if Luka simply believed he couldn't be killed. Luka paused, then replied coldly. The Empire was one thing, but the intruder's infuriating attitude was something he couldn't overlook. The intruder laughed and remarked that Luka's rebellious personality didn't quite fit within the Empire's mold. Confidently, he added that they were bound to meet again and proposed they exchange names. He introduced himself as Rick Kaiser, a Republican. Luka narrowed his eyes and asked if Rick was a terrorist. Rick smirked and replied that he preferred to be associated with the resistance. Unimpressed, Luka gave a faint smile and apologized, explaining that he couldn't understand a word until Rick stopped barking like a dog. Rick asked if Luka truly believed he wouldn't bite. Without warning, he floated off the ground and dashed toward Luka with blinding speed. Luka tried to defend himself against the incoming punch, but his arms shattered under the force. Reacting instinctively, he countered with a powerful kick that caught Rick off guard, but Rick crushed Luka's leg with ease. Grabbing Luka by the neck, Rick raised him effortlessly and told him this was his last chance, urging him to beg for his life. But Luka simply smiled and spit in his face. Rick chuckled. "I like that," he said. He then offered Luka a final message. If he survived, he was to give Quinuan Rick's regards, and let him know that Rick Kaiser was doing just fine. The last sound Luka heard that day was the snap of his own neck. At the Imperial Troops Hospital located in the capital, Felix and Luka were brought in for treatment. Felix had suffered severe brain damage, and aid for his broken neck arrived too late to save him. Luka, however, was comparatively fortunate. Moments after the intruder attacked him, he heard that 4 Imperial Guards had arrived with Jiselle to rescue him. Had they not administered first aid immediately, Luka might not have survived either. The chief centurion, Hylas, later visited Luka to hear his account of the incident. After listening to Luka's report, Hylas revealed that Rick Kaiser's real name was Rick Silva Nunez, the name of a highly wanted criminal Luka had unknowingly fought. It was the first time Luka had heard of him, so Hylas explained that not all wanted criminals were made public, particularly those whose exposure could bring shame to the Empire. Hylas then stated that he believed it was only right to tell Luka the truth behind the operation. Operation Juliet was a plan set in motion 5 years prior. Its objective was to infiltrate the anti-Empire terrorist organization known as Nemesis. Due to their decentralized structure, Nemesis could not be dismantled through conventional means. No matter how many were eliminated, new members would always rise to take their place. The only viable strategy was to remove the leadership. Luka questioned whether the operation had failed, given that Rick had not been captured. However, Hylas replied that the mission had actually succeeded. They had successfully planted a spy at the core of Nemesis. When Luka asked what he meant, Hylas revealed that Barbara was the spy. Nemesis had recruited her for her hacking expertise, unaware of her true allegiance. Luka was stunned. He found it hard to believe that someone as unpredictable and dangerous as Barbara was working for their side. Luka reflected on the people who had suffered as a result of the operation. Felix, whose brain had been damaged. Zelene, who had wasted so much time pursuing the culprit. And Hylas's own daughter, Jiselle, who had endured torment at the hands of Barbara for far too long. He wondered if they had all simply been disposable pawns. Luka asked Hylas whether Jiselle knew the truth. Hylas responded that she was completely unaware and that it was better for her to remain that way. Hylas then turned to Luka and asked if he understood why he was sharing all of this. Without waiting for an answer, he handed Luka a document and instructed him to read and sign it. A slow smile formed on Luka's face as Hylas welcomed him into the Custoria family, revealing the document to be an adoption declaration form. As the mechanical aid was slowly removed from Luka's back, he recalled what Hylas had said, that it would take some time to process the paperwork due to a few stubborn elders in their family. After all the screws were taken out, the medical android informed him that he would experience some pain and discomfort for a while. Luka put on his jacket and left the room. Felix wished him good luck as he walked out. At the Imperial Guard education hall, Luka checked on Barbara, a spy planted by the Empire to infiltrate the terrorist group, Nemesis. Even now, the thought of her still made his heart race. But her actions hadn't been mere performance. She was, without a doubt, a twisted human being. Still, Luka wondered if even her personality had been engineered by the Empire for the mission. He questioned whether all of this could truly be a coincidence. Escaping the orphanage in the lower sector, meeting Quinuan, learning the Archie's combat method, and everything that had happened at the academy. He had once believed that he was acting on his own free will, guided by his conscience. But now, he wondered, had he really overcome his past through hard work, or had it all been orchestrated from the start? Luka shook off the thought, telling himself not to waver. Perhaps the chief centurion was merely testing his loyalty to the Empire. He reminded himself, he couldn't lose focus now. This was his chance to change everything. Luka paid a visit to Quinuan, who asked if he had enjoyed his youth at the academy. Luka replied with a quiet, yes, then admitted that he had almost never made it back. Quinuan offered his condolences for what had happened to Felix, noting that he had been an excellent trainee. Luka then shared that Rick had asked him to send his regards and that he was doing well. Quinuan smiled faintly, remarking that he never expected Rick to become a terrorist. He revealed that he and Rick had been part of the same batch of recruits, and that Rick's reaction speed had always been exceptional. Luka asked if Quinuan no longer kept in contact with Rick. Quinuan responded that while he may be retired, he was still on the Empire's payroll, therefore, he wouldn't reach out to a known terrorist. He then pointed out that Luka hadn't reported to the chief centurion either. If Luka truly had suspicions, Quinuan argued, he should have reported them immediately. Luka explained that doing so could have led to Quinuan's execution, and he had wanted to verify the truth himself before taking such a step. Quinuan shook his head and said that if the Empire intended to execute him over something like that, he would have been dead a long time ago. He then narrowed his eyes and asked what Luka's real reason was for trying to butter him up. Luka fell silent for a moment before finally asking, what the hell is the Archie's combat method? Quinuan didn't answer right away. Instead, he returned the question with one of his own. Why are you so curious? Luka revealed that the Empire kept a list of all Archi's users, and that it was the reason Rick hadn't destroyed his head. Quinuan responded by remarking that Luka got there faster than anticipated. He expressed surprise at how much Luka seemed to know for someone still considered a trainee. Quinuan then continued, sharing that around 200 years ago, the first rebellion in the Empire's history had taken place. The leader of the rebels was Noel Mulizka, a former executive consultant. Noel had been a major contributor to the Empire, having laid the foundation for numerous advanced combat theories. However, he eventually concluded that launching a direct assault against the Empire would be futile. As a result, he chose to adopt guerrilla warfare tactics. This strategic shift marked the birth of Archi's Victima, later known as the Archi's combat method. Luka was shocked to learn that the very combat methodology he had been studying was rooted in an act of treason. Noel's rebel army had fully embraced Archi's Victima, replacing traditional strategists with users of this new method and continuing their resistance against the Empire. Luka realized that the usual drawbacks of the Archi's combat method were virtually non-existent when applied to guerrilla warfare. Moreover, due to the rebels' lack of a standardized combat system, a more adaptable and flexible approach had become a necessity. Despite numerous operations aimed at eradicating the rebellion, Noel and a small group of core members always managed to evade capture. They dispersed across the Empire, recruiting new soldiers and orchestrating attacks on critical Imperial facilities. Their strategy was simple. Even if some were caught, the movement would survive. They would simply cut off the tail and keep moving forward. Luka could picture it clearly in his mind. The rebels likely had little difficulty blending in with civilians. Their cybernetic implants were designed for non-combat purposes, making it nearly impossible to suspect that they were actually key figures within the rebellion. Since Archi's Victima users could fight effectively without relying on high-powered cybernetics, they could easily pass through routine inspections undetected. It dawned on Luka, perhaps that was why Rick had spared his life. And now he finally understood why the Empire maintained a list of Archi's Victima users. Curious, Luka asked Quinuan how the Empire had managed to uproot the rebels. Quinuan responded bluntly, the Empire simply executed anyone who appeared suspicious. Luka was horrified by the answer. There had been no time to distinguish between civilians and rebels. Several regions had been completely devastated by the resulting massacres. Even Archi's Victima users couldn't withstand such brutal measures, as the risk of mass casualties became too great. That was how the rebellion was ultimately crushed. Luka questioned whether this part of history had been deliberately hidden by the Empire. Quinuan responded that the Empire didn't exactly hide it, but they didn't teach it either. Unless someone actively sought it out, they would likely never learn of it. The treason of Noel Mulizka, a key figure in the development of the Empire's military doctrine, the massacres carried out by the Empire, and Quinuan himself, an instructor of the Imperial Guard, fully versed in the combat methods once used by the rebels. The weight of it all led Luka to ask whether the real reason the chief centurion had sent him there was due to a suspicion that Quinuan might have ties to terrorists. Quinuan clapped his hands and praised Luka with a smile. He told Luka that if he managed to uncover any proof of Quinuan's contact with Nemesis, he would ascend to the very heart of the Imperial Guard in an instant. With a nervous sweat on his brow, Luka confessed that he didn't believe Quinuan was aligned with terrorists. Quinuan replied that Luka might think so, but the chief centurion had other ideas. Offering a hint, Quinuan advised Luka to look into his own movements during his time in the lower sector. He assured Luka that doing so would aid him on his path to success. Luka wondered just how much the chief centurion truly knew. Had the chief already been aware of everything when he sent Luka to Quinuan? He stood up and stated firmly that he would report everything he had heard today to the chief centurion. Quinuan simply responded with a calm, "See you again." Confused and frustrated, Luka rushed off into the corridor, his mind reeling. It felt like everyone was just playing games with him. He couldn't shake the thought that he was nothing more than a pawn in a subtle power play between the chief centurion and Quinuan, each using him to test the other's intentions. Quinuan was becoming increasingly difficult to read, and Luka couldn't find any solid information from official sources. Still, he refused to be manipulated. He sighed, realizing he had no real choice but to follow Quinuan's advice. If he wanted answers, he would have to seek them out himself. With resolve, Luka decided he needed to go to the lower sectors and trace Quinuan's past. The chief centurion, who had sent Luka to Quinuan on suspicion of his ties to terrorists, remained a looming figure in the background. And Quinuan himself, still so carefree, despite the suspicion surrounding him. The words he spoke to Luka lingered in Luka's mind, leaving him to wonder what Quinuan had truly meant. Luka questioned why Quinuan was directing him toward the lower sectors. Was he being led into a trap? Was Quinuan trying to guide him toward Nemesis to have him eliminated? Or was this all a test, a ploy by Quinuan and the Empire to assess his loyalty? But Luka rejected that idea. He vowed not to let them manipulate him. It was too late to turn back now. He had to complete all preparations and begin tracing Quinuan's path. The first step was to report his conversation with Quinuan. Luka informed the chief that Quinuan appeared to be taunting them. Hylas then revealed that Rick and Quinuan had both been involved in covert operations during the same period, suggesting a possible connection between the two. Hylas asked Luka if he wasn't curious about why Quinuan was being left alone despite the suspicions against him. Luka replied that if the reason was something he wasn't authorized to know, he was content remaining in the dark. However, Hylas responded that he trusted Luka, and because of that trust, he disclosed that the order to investigate Quinuan had come from a source higher than the Imperial Guard itself. They believed Quinuan was a key to uncovering Nemesis. There were suspicions that he might be in contact with Rick. Luka then questioned why someone so dangerous had been allowed to become an instructor. Hylas explained that Quinuan had threatened to leave if denied the position, and that his aptitude as an instructor was exceptional. Hylas then asked Luka if that explanation cleared things up. Luka replied that he had stayed close to Quinuan for quite some time, but had yet to see any openings. Quinuan's self-control was impeccable. He concealed his true thoughts flawlessly. But Hylas dismissed Luka's complaint, telling him not to whine and to do his best. He was the only one suited for the task. Hylas revealed that he had placed several trainees under Quinuan's supervision over the past few decades, but Luka was the only one who had made significant progress. He concluded that Quinuan seemed to favor Luka. Luka then raised his head and told Hylas that, if that were the case, he would require authorization beyond that of a trainee. Luka had requested several things from the chief centurion: a pass to travel freely between the upper and lower sectors, authorization to carry personal arms, investigation funds, and access to high-clearance databases. Even with all that, it still wasn't enough. He could be sacrificed at any moment. He had to do everything within his power to survive. Not long ago, Luka had expressed that he had no intention of dying over some underwater conspiracy, especially not just for knowing more than he was supposed to. Hylas had been blunt with him. If the higher-ups decided to bury the operation, there would be several individuals he would need to eliminate, Luka included. However, Hylas had also promised to do everything within his authority to protect him. That, he said, was the reason he brought Luka into his family. With that decision came the responsibility of entrusting Luka's life to the chief centurion. Hylas had admitted he wasn't one for traditions, but this particular one held meaning. He advised Luka to go and greet his new family. He also encouraged Luka to act naturally, saying his presence would be a refreshing change for his children. In Luka's mind, he couldn't quite understand what Hylas was thinking. But if he expected protection from Hylas, then Luka would have to play by his rules, no matter how irritating they might be. After arriving at their destination, Luka was advised to rest in a room that had been prepared for him. He gazed out the window and observed how everyone was busy trying to curry favor with Hylas. Just thinking about how he would have to squeeze into that world exhausted him. It felt no different from the bottom feeders in the lower sectors. Luka questioned whether this was truly the life he had once dreamed of. Moments later, Jiselle appeared and apologized for her behavior the other day. Luka responded casually, telling her not to worry, explaining that it was natural for a civilian to be distressed in those kinds of situations. Jiselle then shared that she had visited Felix, but he hadn't been able to recognize her. Luka reassured her, saying she could feel grateful, but there was no need for guilt. Felix had simply been fulfilling his duties as an Imperial Guard. Jiselle then asked Luka if he remembered what he had once told her, that he would support her if he ever became part of the Custoria family. Luka replied that he hadn't been lying. And now, he believed, Jiselle understood enough for them to negotiate. Jiselle nodded and said she would share some information. Luka, she added, should consider it her way of repaying him. Jiselle shared that her father was not the type to hold hands. The two people Luka needed to be most cautious of were her older brothers, the first and second. According to her, they were likely feeling immense pressure due to Luka's sudden arrival. Luka questioned why they would feel threatened when he was merely adopted. Jiselle explained that the Custoria family was a family of soldiers. Both of her brothers had notable flaws that made them unfit to become the next head of the family. Luka, on the other hand, already met the criteria. He was an elite soldier, after all. Even without sharing their bloodline, that alone made him a legitimate threat in their eyes. Luka admitted it made sense for them to be wary. But what caught Jiselle off guard was when Luka asked about her. Was she truly not interested in becoming the next head of the family? Jiselle replied that she didn't believe she was obligated to answer that question. Luka then shared his own stance. He had no desire to become the family's next leader. However, if anyone tried to stamp him out, he wouldn't stand idly by. He added that if opportunity ever came knocking, she shouldn't hesitate to open the door. Luka smiled and told her that was his advice, as her brother. Jiselle was momentarily stunned, then laughed at his words. She looked at him and asked, "If that day comes, will you support me?" Luka promised he would, as long as she never stood against him. The two shook hands, and Jiselle told him she would treat him as an ally. Luka and Jiselle entered the area together, where the Custoria family's second son, Joel, the eldest son, Nicholas, and the head of the family's wife, Eva, were waiting. Eva told Luka that she had heard a lot about him. As Luka looked at Eva, he sensed that she didn't like him, and he guessed that this was only natural. Eva then invited Luka to take a seat, as her husband would be arriving soon. Jiselle whispered to Luka, advising him not to give their mother a reason to criticize him, as their father wasn't the type to shield him from such remarks. Moments later, Hylas arrived and informed everyone that it was time to eat.